Chapter 480. Spark had come to Earth alone, but she was a playful person. Otherwise, she would not have met Nightwing, who was running around the streets. As a righteous person, she could not rob others even if she did not have any income. Now that Thea offered her a job opportunity, she thought about it carefully. Seeing that Nightwing did not object, she agreed. The TV program definitely couldn't be made boring. If Spark were to read the script on stage alone and talk about extraterrestrials, and the wonders of extraterrestrial technology, no one would watch it. She also had to find an assistant. This person had to be an Earthling with good looks and not afraid of aliens. It would be best if he or she had some experience in recording TV programs. With so many conditions, there were not many candidates, but Thea soon found a suitable candidate. The former anchor lady was recalled to Earth by her. "You still want me to do the program?" The former anchor lady was a little frustrated. She was forced to do it to make a living. Now that she was so powerful, did she still have to do it? Yes, she had to do it. The young lady's order was unquestionable, so the former anchor lady had to come out again. Spark was not difficult to get along with. Although the anchor lady was still a little unhappy, returning to the program recording site gave her an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Everything was paved with money. The first episode of the program was broadcasted smoothly. Princess Spark did not need to tell the Earthlings how big the universe was. She just focused on the environment she grew up in and the humanities. The experienced anchor lady asked some questions at the right time, and the two worked well together for the first time. Once the program was broadcasted, the response was not very enthusiastic. However, Spark's beautiful appearance and sincere voice still received some praise. Thea did not expect much abuse, which made her more confident in the follow-up plan. Except for Luther, who was a little dissatisfied that the anchor lady no longer mocked Superman, it was generally very harmonious. The control of Iban Trading Company was in full swing. One of their 15 decision-makers had been secretly controlled by Jared. The next step was to control their active computers and lead the robots to Rebel, the Yellow Lantern Corps, set things right at the critical moment. They started with the armed forces and gradually nibbled away this neutral universe business alliance. Later, they would develop their forces and feed back some technological equipment to Earth. The neutral camp was the entry point that Thea prepared for Earth to go out of the solar system in the future. After determining the future direction of development, Moira's enthusiasm was unprecedentedly high. In order to expand her network, she decided to hold a grand Christmas dinner in the name of the city government. Naturally, her children were all present. Even Diana, who had a bad premonition, was pulled over by Thea. "Mrs. Quinn, I've heard a lot about you." Diana bowed, slightly. Her etiquette was impeccable. It was the etiquette of a junior to an elder. "Miss Prince, I often hear Thea talk about you." Moira was well aware of the relationship between the beautiful woman in front of her and her daughter. Nowadays, this was not a rare thing. Since they were willing, Moira was naturally not dissatisfied. She gently held Diana's hand and said a few words. Soon, other guests arrived. Thea pulled Diana aside. "Your mother is very elegant. She's an amazing person." When Diana saw that a woman had achieved something, she thought that the woman was a good person. This idea was deeply ingrained in her mind and could not be changed. "Yeah, don't you think she's a bit similar to Queen Hippolyte?" Thea joked. "Huh, that's true. No wonder I feel so close to her." Diana thought about it seriously and nodded solemnly. Thea was amused. These women in power had the same basic characteristics. As if to prove her point, another middle-aged woman chatted with Moira. It was Lex Luthor's mother, Lydia Luthor. She had brought her daughter, Lena Luthor, to the dinner party. Not long after, Oliver brought Shadow, and Tommy brought Laurel to the venue. Moira's ambition was not small this time. She had mobilized all her connections, and with Sia's timely help, there were a lot of politicians on the scene. The vice president, members of Congress, several ministers, and many socialites who had received the invitation were all present. The safety of the politicians could not be neglected. The Super Investigation Bureau of the Heavens, I Society had sent their best men to protect the guests. The Martian hunter, who pretended to be cool every day, was also present. Not only was he present, but the Gotham tycoon Bruce Wayne and this year's Pulitzer Prize winner, Clark Kent, were also present. Thea's eyelids twitched when she saw them. However, they had to pretend not to know each other. This was a severe test for Diana and Superman, whose acting was slightly immature. There were even more irrelevant people, such as Catwoman and Louise Lane, who were relatives, and Damian and Raven, who were there to eat and drink. Thea even saw Spark and Nightwing whispering to each other, which made Barbara, who came with her father, unhappy. Barry Allen, who did not have much combat power, Felicity, a few friends from the Star City Laboratory, Caitlin Snow, her fiancé Ronnie Raymond, and Cisco Ramon were all present. Some of them were Oliver's friends, while others were Thea's friends. With so many young people gathered together, it was quite a lively scene. Seeing Thea sizing up the venue, Diana was a little puzzled. What's wrong? Did something happen? Of course, Thea could not say that with so many heroes with the luck of protagonists gathered together, she would not be surprised if a dark side jumped out in the next second. She laughed awkwardly, indicating that she was fine. However, things in the world were always unpredictable. When you thought of something, the good might not necessarily come, but the bad would definitely come. Pretending to walk past casually, Clark Kent whispered to her with his old-fashioned eyes, "There's a group of people 5 miles away, armed with guns. They seem to be coming here. Also, there seems to be a mole in this venue." Thea immediately activated her supervision to observe the interior of the venue. She did not notice it before, but now she realized that some of the staff present had fierce looks and a fierce temperament. Even though they kept their heads down, she could still see that they were up to no good from the corner of her eyes. Following Superman's instructions, he observed the movement 10 miles away. It was indeed a small gang. There were more than 30 people, and they were armed with all kinds of guns. The leader was a tall and strong man. He was discussing something in 2 trucks. They were heading straight for the city hall. Thea heaved a sigh of relief. There was nothing to be afraid of. She did not know the soldiers, but she had seen a picture of the leader. Wasn't that the brick wall who had recently disappeared? The waiters in the venue were Keanu's men, codenamed White Porcelain of the Triad. Thea even saw a few men with indescribable Menon characteristics helping in the kitchen. Chapter 481. In addition to a few spies in the venue, their leader, nicknamed White Porcelain, was wearing a wig to cover up her white hair. She was wearing a high-slit cheongsam and was greeting guests at the entrance. Thea felt sorry for them. There were so many heroes here, it would be safer for them to rob the White House. They were so stupid. The heroes here could beat the shit out of them. However, there were so many heroes that they had to worry about. Who was going to do it? Uncle Ronjen, can you control their minds? Thea contacted the Martian hunter telepathically. The result was as she expected. The Martian hunter refused without hesitation. "I won't use my ability on ordinary people. You deal with it yourself." Thea sighed. Fortunately, Superman was a warm-hearted person and volunteered to deal with the people in the brick wall. They could detect abnormalities with their special abilities. Some of the bodyguards and agents of the politicians also noticed the abnormalities of these people. Agents sounded powerful, but in fact, they were only at a slightly higher level than ordinary people. If they took action first and caused a commotion, they would directly destroy the venue that Moira had carefully prepared. This was something that Thea would not allow. Also, the identities of many superheroes could not be exposed. This made her a little cautious. After whispering to Thea to make a big noise to attract the attention of the agents in the venue, she whispered to Oliver, "Keanuway's people are in the venue. How many are there?" Oliver's eyesight was the best among humans and had been strengthened repeatedly. Now that it had reached a higher level, after receiving Thea's warning, he immediately looked at the scene and found a lot of clues. 5. Don't make a scene. The 4 of you and Diana each take one of them nearby and deal with them. Don't disturb Mother. After receiving Thea's signal, Felicity had a conflict with a waiter. After many years of being a vice president, she was full of dignity and scolded the waiter until he apologized repeatedly. Thea directly cast a slow spell on the 5 people in the venue. Time was tight, and they couldn't make any big casting movements, so the power of this spell was reduced to the minimum. It could only make them fall into a trance for a while, but that was enough. They split up. There were still 4 enemies in the kitchen, so Thea left them to Batman's team. Seeing that Batman and the others pretended to go to the toilet and led Nightwing, Barbara, and Catwoman to the kitchen, Thea also found her target. With her face almost frozen from smiling, Chenaway, who was dressed as a greeter, was just about to catch her breath when she saw one of her targets, Thea Quinn, walk past her. Just as she was wondering how much money she could earn from this kidnapping, she saw Thea glance at her nonchalantly. Fear instantly welled up in her heart. Her childhood misfortune, everyone rolling their eyes at her, her youth wandering in a gang, her constant defection to new bosses, and her constant betrayal. She had worked so hard to get to where she was today, but everything seemed to have changed between illusion and reality. All her previous experiences were like a dream. She had walked through her life again. A few subtle changes made her feel like she had fallen into an abyss. She was no longer the leader of the triad, but a beggar by the roadside waiting for death. She was still hiding under the bridge in the cold wind, a pitiful person waiting for help. "This can't be real. This can't be real." She murmured softly, but her voice was so soft that she couldn't even hear it. Her willpower was not bad. Thea nodded slightly. Many ordinary heroes and villains had stronger willpower than those with superpowers. This was the difference between suddenly gaining power and gradually gaining power. However, this was meaningless. She was now using a new application of supervision and fear. It was an allusion to the Taoist's dream of golden millet. However, those were all good dreams. Her modified version was a nightmare, and each time was worse than the last. Chenaway quickly entered her 3rd dream. Her consciousness was stuck in the memories of the past. Subconsciously, she was scared out of her wits. She could no longer tell if her previous glory was still there. Unparalleled fear was rapidly growing in her heart. Finally, after the 6th dream, her willpower was defeated. Her eyes lost focus, her legs went soft, and she fell straight back. For her, a long time had passed, but in fact, only a second had passed in the outside world. As she fell to the ground, Thea, who happened to pass by her, directly grabbed her. "She may be malnourished. I'll help her to the side to rest." Facing the curious eyes of the other greeters, Thea explained. They did not suspect anything. This was the metropolitan hero, the winner of the Nobel Prize in medicine. She was a super-rich person. There was no need to lie to them. They did not know the truth, but they felt that Thea was very humane and a good person. They all looked at her with admiration as she carried Chenaway away. As she began to move, the few people in the banquet hall also moved. In a real battle, no one was afraid of this group of nameless soldiers. However, if they did not want to attract attention, they would need to be prepared. Oh, Sorry, I stepped on your foot. My hand slipped. Is your clothes okay? With all kinds of messy excuses, he dragged out all the enemies who had been affected by the slow spell and were dizzy out of the hall, then tied them up and knocked them out. Batman and Superman also moved quickly. In order not to expose the true identity of the heroes, everyone chose to knock the enemies out. The banquet was in progress. They could not leave for too long. Moreover, with more than 40 people tied together, it was too easy to be discovered. Thea directly tied them together and threw them into the portal. On the other side was Oliver's lair. They pretended that nothing had happened and returned to the banquet hall to eat and drink. It was as if the group of more than 40 people did not exist at all. The Christmas banquet was extremely successful. Moira could not stop smiling. There were still many people who understood her intentions. Many people expressed their support for her candidacy. She was so excited that she drank a lot of wine. After the banquet, Thea sent her home and then rushed to Oliver's place to see the results of his interrogation. Superman and Batman did not participate in Star City's affairs. Diana also went home early. Only Oliver's Green Arrow team was left at the scene. Oliver was helpless about his enemy's idiocy today and sent him to his door as a Christmas gift. He had already caught them, so it was impossible to let them go. However, he wanted to know the purpose of the other party tonight. Was it because his true identity was exposed, or for other reasons? However, his subordinates did not know anything. No matter how they tried to scare them, it was useless. Brickwall and Canaway were in a deep coma, so there was no way to ask. When Thea arrived, the Green Arrow team was fully armed and wearing masks. They were splashing water on Canaway's face. She did not look at the poor person who accepted her new version of a pipe dream, but looked at the brawny brick wall. This triad member, with a little superpower, seemed to have a bad brain. Thea saw the battle between Superman and them from afar. This guy actually let Superman punch him, so as to test his endurance. In the face of such a sincere request, Superman was a little surprised, but he did not refuse. He used 10% of his strength and gently hit him. Then this guy became the miserable state in front of Thea. Chapter 482. The chest area of his dark black jacket was shattered, and there was a huge fistprint on his chest. His special ability allowed his body to slowly recover, but the injury was too heavy, and it would take a lot of time for him to recover to his peak condition. On the other hand, Keanuway's eyes had rolled back, and it was all thanks to Thea. She was lost in her dreams, and she didn't know which was her past and which was an illusion. She struggled in self-denial and finally lost consciousness. In layman's terms, she overused her brain in a short period of time, and it crashed. Keanuway's self-consciousness immediately noticed the abnormality after retracting the fear she had set up. She had a deep impression of what she had experienced, and every detail was unmistakably real, which was a sharp contrast to the false and empty nightmare. She wasn't a beggar on the street, nor was she a tragic and indescribable woman. She was the leader of the triad. Keanuway's consciousness instantly took over her body. Although she was extremely weak and dizzy, she still tried to stand up to defend against the enemy's attack. "Who's there?" Like a patient with a high fever, she stood up shakily and tried to open one eye. When she saw a green arrow's bow aimed at her, her heart sank. "What are you doing at the city hall?" Oliver, who had a voice changer, pulled the bowstring and asked sternly, "I'm going to the city hall? What am I going to do there?" Keanuway's memory was a little chaotic, and it took her a long time to sort it out. Looking at her companions who were tied up like dumplings, she knew that the operation had failed. But where did it fail? She didn't know that there were a lot of superheroes in the city hall, and she only felt that she had lost unjustly. She had climbed up from the bottom, and she had always believed that failure was the mother of success. If she lost today, she would find the problem and win it back tomorrow. This had always been her creed. But today's operation was really inexplicable. If it was said that the Green Arrow Party had defeated her, she would not believe it at all. Both parties had been fighting for half a year. If the other party had the means to silently capture her, how could she have survived until today? But a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. She knew too well that she had to admit her mistakes and stand properly when she was beaten. We're going to kidnap some city officials and extort a sum of money. Oliver was a little incredulous. You're so courageous that you're going to challenge the world's superheroes just for a little money? There was a hint of doubt in his tone. That's all. Canaway looked at him, puzzled. Her mind spun rapidly as she analyzed the information Oliver had revealed. However, before she could think clearly, she saw a white light flash, and she fainted again. Thea knocked her out. It seems to be a coincidence. This girl only knows about the city government's Christmas dinner. She thought it was just an ordinary event in Star City. She didn't expect so many politicians to be there. Oliver could also understand what his sister meant. Moira still had 2 years left in her term as mayor. Today was just a small preliminary test. There was no big publicity. These two unlucky bastards did not know that the vice president and a bunch of senators were present. The so-called democracy and equality were all nonsense. Kidnapping a clerk was a criminal case. Kidnapping the vice president was no different from treason. The vice presidents and members of parliament arrived late. Their informants did not see these people. If they had known the details of today's meeting in advance, they would not have courted death. After the farce was over, Oliver was in charge of whether these unlucky guys would be sent to the police or dealt with. Sia went directly to Diana's apartment in London. It was late at night in London. It was quiet all around. Only the occasional barking of the neighbor's dog could be heard. The dog was immediately appeased by its owner. The crime of disturbing the public was not a joke. At this time in the quiet room, a slight fluctuation woke Thea up. It was the fluctuation of space transmission. Her first reaction was that someone was going to sneak up on her. Then she thought that this movement was not small. The probability of a sneak attack was not high. With her skills, there were not many people on Earth who could defeat her. Besides, Diana was still by her side. Even if Superman came to kill her, she would not be afraid. Diana's reaction was not slow either. The two of them sat up at the same time and looked at the uninvited guest vigilantly. The translucent transmission wave spread out, and a young woman stumbled out. She had short blonde hair and was wearing a shirt, shorts, and a pair of slippers. She held a key tightly in her hand. She looked around in panic. She seemed to sense something and looked at the other side of the bed. For bright eyes were staring at her. "Hi, Diana." The young woman did not know Thea. She only felt that the woman's eyes were too sharp, as if she was trying to see through her organs. It was a little funny. How could a human's eyes see through their organs? The sudden arrival of an unfamiliar environment made her very nervous. Fortunately, she soon found a familiar face. She knew Diana. "Zola, why are you in my house? I remember that you went back to your hometown." Diana did know this girl. She was a very kind person and had worked for her foundation for a while. I'm at my family's farm." "You know my farm? It's in Virginia." But a strange blue-skinned man came and said that he wanted to protect me. Then we were attacked. He gave me the key, and I'm here. The woman named Zola told Diana the whole story incoherently. She didn't know why she was telling Diana the whole story. She just said it naturally. "She's my employee, or at least my former employee. I think I should help her," Diana explained to Thea. Thea could not say anything. She could only chuckle. The woman in front of her had an identity that even she did not know. She was the reincarnation of Athena. However, Thea could not find any trace of divine power in her. She was just an ordinary person. Her physical characteristics were not obvious. After a while, people would realize that she was pregnant. The result announced to the public was that the stallion, Mr. Zeus, was old but not old. He had given Diana and the others a new brother and sister. The actual situation was that this main god was hiding from his eldest son and putting on a shocking show. The one who was born was not his son, but himself. According to Sia's understanding, his main account could not be leveled up anymore, and his level had been maxed out. So he took this opportunity to level up a side account. If he could get the source in the process, the old god would become a new god, and that would be even better. Thea kept looking at the young woman. She was a little disappointed. She was just an ordinary person, at least before the will of the gods. There were no flaws at all. As for the blue-skinned freak that she mentioned, it should be Hermes. Hermes was the god of speed and thieves in Greek mythology. However, he seemed to be honest, but he had other intentions. Seeing that Diana seemed to want to get involved, Thea could only go with her. She would meet Ares soon and accidentally kill the god of war in battle. Thea had to stop her. Chapter 483. It wasn't because Thea had a close relationship with the god of war, but because the god of war's godhood was a trap. Diana had killed the god of war and automatically obtained the god of war's godhood. 5,000 years ago, this would have been a good thing. However, at this critical juncture where the old god had fallen and the new god had risen, it would be too much of a trap if she didn't become the old god instead of the new one. The girl named Zola watched them change. In the dim light of the night, she felt that Thea looked familiar, but she wasn't sure. She didn't want to say anything, especially after seeing how close the two girls were. "How do we get there?" Diana asked. "I think the key in my hand can take us back," Zola said before Angelina could. Thea glanced at it. It was an exquisite magic item without any traps. She nodded at Diana, and the three teleported away. As soon as they left the teleportation portal, two sharp arrows shot toward them one after the other. With two muffled sounds, Thea and Diana reached out and grabbed an arrow at the same time. They were using the Assassin League's famous grabbing technique. Although the ninja master couldn't win against the two girls, even if he did somersaults, his martial arts skills were praiseworthy. Some techniques were very useful at any time. As the person closest to Thea, Diana's martial arts skills were naturally affected. Facing the incoming arrows, the two girls both chose to use the Assassin League's grabbing technique. Casually throwing the arrow on the ground, Zola stepped back in fear. The two girls fearlessly looked at the enemy approaching from the dark. Clatter, clatter. Two tall horses with majestic torsos and slender limbs came out. There was a knight holding a bow on each of the horses. However, when they walked into the night, the three of them finally saw what they looked like. They were not knights at all, but centaurs. The places where the horses' heads should have been were replaced by human bodies. Their upper bodies were covered in mud and blood. The human heads were also twisted out of shape, like stomped watermelons. Their eyes were blood red, and the sounds coming out of their mouths were like the howls of humans and the roars of horses. This is not a natural creature. It seems to be the product of some kind of magical transformation. Thea said in disgust. She vaguely remembered that these two were sent by Hera, the Queen of Gods. The Queen of Gods, who was known for her jealousy, naturally wanted to kill Zora, who was pregnant. For these old gods who only stared at her every day, Sia really didn't want to get involved in their affairs. It was just that the noble circle was too messy, like a melodramatic family drama. It would be unreasonable if they didn't perish. However, Diana couldn't run away. According to Hippolyte's original words, This was her innate responsibility. Although Thea didn't want to, she could only helplessly jump in. What a blasphemy against life. Diana carefully sized up the centaur. Its aura was filled with madness and savagery. This thing was clearly beyond saving. One each. The two glanced at each other and instantly understood each other's meaning. Diana attacked first. She threw out her shield and knocked away the arrow. Then, she jumped up and slashed at the centaur's neck. Thea wasn't as powerful as her. These two centaurs only looked ferocious and had their full potential stimulated by magic. They were not afraid of death, but their true strength was not worth mentioning. Thea didn't have good armor. Unlike Diana, who was fully armed, she had only changed into casual clothes. She had many tricks up her sleeve and didn't really want to fight with these dirty centaurs. She opened her jade-white left hand, and a chain made of lightning whizzed out and smashed at the centaur's head. The centaur, who only had killing in its mind, realized that it couldn't take the attack head-on. It half-knelt and lowered its body, dodging the chain. At the same time, it drew its bow and shot another arrow at Thea. "You want to compete with me in archery?" Thea didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Such a crude magic creation wasn't worthy of her shooting back. "Go back." With a beautiful irony spell, the arrow quickly changed direction in the air and flew back at an even faster speed. The centaur was caught off guard, and the arrow pierced through its body. Thick, dark blood flowed out continuously. Sia was unforgiving. The lightning chain that she had thrown out earlier was remolded by her, and a spear surrounded by lightning was thrown out by her. She wasn't too sure about the centaur's fatal points, but aiming at the head was usually the right choice. Puchi! The lightning spear pierced a large hole in the center of the centaur's head. The centaur looked like it was drunk as it spun around on the spot. Then it lost its sense of direction and fell to the ground. Its limbs trembled a few times before it completely lost its breath. Only then did Thea look to the other side. Diana was also very fast. In just a few moves, she found a flaw in the opponent. She dodged the opponent's attack and flew up. Her body drew a beautiful arc in the air. With a light flick of her wrist, the centaur's huge and twisted head was chopped off by her. The two ended the battle at the same time. Zola, who was watching the show, remembered the blue-skinned monster, who saved her and hurried back to her room. The two girls finished off their enemies and confirmed that they were dead. Then, they followed Zola into the room. The first thing they saw when they entered the room was a man lying on the ground. He was blue all over and dressed in tattered clothes like a beggar. The most eye-catching thing about him was that he had a pair of bird claws where his feet should have been. This was Hermes. However, this god who was famous for his speed wasn't in a good condition. A crude spear that was similar to the one worn by the two centaurs outside the door pierced through his body. The god of speed was lying on the ground, his breathing barely discernible. He's really good at acting. He really put in a lot of effort to make this family drama go smoothly. Sia thought to herself. She could tell with a few casual glances that the other party was really injured, and very seriously at that. This Hermes was much weaker than she had initially thought. Although the two centaurs at the door were powerful, it depended on who they were compared to. They were definitely invincible against ordinary people, and any slightly more powerful hero could kill them. At least, Thea felt that Oliver wouldn't have to spend too much effort to deal with the two centaurs. If he called his archery club over, he would be able to kill them without any losses. The two magically modified centaurs were such weak opponents, but they had almost killed the god of speed and thieves of the Greek pantheon. Who would believe it if they told others? Divine power couldn't be offended easily, but it didn't bother to hide it either. Hermes was faking it, but his true strength was indeed so low that it hurt people's hearts. Even though he tried his best to hide it, one could still estimate his general strength. Thea felt that she could fight 3 or 4 opponents of this level even if she counted his hidden strength. It was important to know that he was one of the 12 main gods at his peak and had once blessed Diana. Now, his divine power was like a candle in the wind, let alone Diana. He could die if he used a little more strength. Chapter 484. Thea felt that she really didn't understand their thoughts. You're already like this. Why don't you just lie down in your God's kingdom? Why do you have to jump out and cause trouble, and then show everyone what it means to struggle at death's door? Thea, see if you can save him. Diana still had some feelings for these gods who had blessed her in the past. She checked Hermes' wound and found that it was very serious, but she wasn't worried. She was originally very talented, and she had also received Morgan Le Fais's magic experience. There was almost no one in the world who could surpass Thea in healing. Diana was very confident in her lover's ability. Who? Hermes, who was lying on the ground with his eyes closed and pretending to be a dead dog, was seriously injured. He didn't know that Diana not only came according to his plan, but also brought another person with her. He had a bad feeling in his heart. This person who suddenly came and might ruin his plan, and this made him very anxious. But now he was seriously injured. Previously, he had pretended to be unconscious. It was unrealistic to immediately jump up to see who this unexpected participant was. No one was more stupid than the other. When the time came, the other person would know that he was pretending, and now he didn't have the strength to jump up. Under his imagination, he had to pretend to be unconscious. This was really a test for his acting skills. He was very anxious, but he had to suppress his consciousness in the depths of his mind. As long as his body showed a slight tremor, Diana would be able to find out that he was pretending to be dead. After all, he also had Athena's blessing, and it wasn't so easy to fool him. Then he heard a clear female voice reply to Diana, and then a warm magic wrapped around his wound. Hermes realized that his plan was in vain. This plan had just started, and there was a huge change. Diana had a demigod who was good at healing. Who was this guy? Unlike Hercules, although Hercules was trapped by the giants for thousands of years, he didn't experience the twilight of the gods. Now, except for a little mental problem, his divine power was basically intact compared to ancient times. Those who hid in their god's kingdom were different. They became gods with the help of faith, and the connection between their god's kingdom and the secular world was too deep and tight. After sleeping for so many years, every minute and every second in the material world was actually wearing down their foundation. It was like a slow suicide. When they finally woke up from their sleep and learned that Zeus, the god king, had disappeared, several gods who were unwilling to die had a new plan. Compared to their heyday, their strength had fallen greatly. Although Poseidon, Hades, and the other big shots were living a tight life, they still had some food at home, and they could last for a long time. As the god of speed and thieves, Hermes couldn't. He didn't know that a year later, there would be something called the god of speed that would deny the meaning of his existence as the god of speed at the level of the rules, resulting in his complete fall. He vaguely felt that he had very little time left, and an invisible sword had fallen on his neck. He was both a chess piece and a chess player. He wanted to survive in the chaos, but his plan was very good. He considered several possibilities and even designed several emergency plans. However, he never expected that such a big change like Thea would jump out in the first act. There must be someone who knew about the relationship between Thea and Diana, but this group of old gods who had just climbed out of their god's kingdom didn't know. They were proud and arrogant. Hermes didn't have much divine power left. He just roughly checked the information and began to put on today's big show. Thea's divine power was that of a real demigod, and there was a vague shadow of the Greek divine power. This couldn't be faked at all. Hermes had to do a deeper analysis. Could it be that old woman Hippolyte had deceived all the gods? At that time, Diana wasn't the only child, but two. Otherwise, it really didn't make sense. In an era when the gods had retired, other than Diana, there was also a young and lively demigod wandering in the world. This was too incredible. Although it was incredible, a warm and vigorous magic power that was full of vitality directly healed his wound. It was not suitable for him to lie on the ground and pretend to be a dead dog. Hermes regretted it so much that his intestines turned green, but he still pretended to be in a trance and opened his eyes. "You are." Although he was mainly looking at Diana, from the corner of his eyes, he still glanced at Sia, who had a stern expression and an outstanding temperament. Her calm gaze seemed to carry a bit of scrutiny. Thea's eyes met Hermes's eyes. The god of speed and thieves felt a little scared. How could this be? No matter how weak he was still one of the main gods. How could he feel scared? He must have thought too much before and felt a little guilty. Hermes didn't know that his feelings of fear had already merged with Thea's eyes. He thought that he was just thinking too much. His eyes flashed, and he subconsciously avoided Thea. Although he felt that there was a big mistake in his plan, he still tried to continue the act. He staggered a few steps and found that Thea had healed him very well. Both demigods had sharp eyes. It was not a good idea to pretend to be a cripple. He cleared his throat. "You are Diana, the daughter of the Amazon. I've seen you before. You shouldn't have come here. Take this girl and run to the end of the earth. Otherwise, she will die in front of the god queen." His words were prepared in advance, but he regretted it as soon as he said them. Thea naturally caught his flaw and said very sincerely, "You are Hermes, the god of speed. Your speed is the best among the gods. We will cover you. Take this woman and leave first." Hermes wanted to give himself 2 tight slaps. He was indeed an idiot. What should he do now? Say that he was not fast enough? Humans could brag, but he was a god. If he said that he was not fast enough, he would be finished in minutes. There was no room for discussion. This was the limit of the rules. If he said that he was not fast enough, it was equivalent to giving up his clergy. The consequences were too serious. Just as he was thinking of a solution, Diana's interruption saved him temporarily. "God Queen, the god queen you are talking about is Hera?" "Yes, Hera's power is everywhere. Her jealousy is also unparalleled, so—" He did not continue. What should he say next? Thea laughed out loud. She was everywhere. What was he bragging about? He was just borrowing the power of the divine artifact. Olympus had a divine mirror that observed everything in the world. This was the source of his understanding of everything. Since the beginning of the battle with the centaurs, she had felt a vague prying. Hermes felt that Thea's laughter was a little harsh. "Young man, don't underestimate the god queen. She has unimaginable divine power." "Is that so?" Through continuous measurement and reverse monitoring, Thea had a rough idea of the other party's location. He seemed to be in another plane. Was that the public area of the Greek gods, Mount Olympus? Chapter 485. She used her supervision to the extreme, and a huge amount of magic power poured into her eyes. With the help of her opponent's artifact channel, her gaze pierced through the space barrier and made eye contact with the middle-aged, luxurious woman in peacock feathers. Hera, the god queen who was watching them, didn't expect to be attacked. The orange energy with fear hit her directly. Even a god couldn't resist fear, especially someone like her, who didn't even have 1/10 of her original strength and wasn't known for her strong will. However, her immortal life still gave her a huge bonus. Her pride as a god didn't let her fall into self-denial, like Kanavi. She reached out with difficulty and closed the channel of the artifact mirror. Is this Hera? Sia secretly mocked Hera. Hera, who had a bad reputation, had been seen through by Sia in just a short exchange. She would be bragging if she said that Hera couldn't withstand a single blow, but she wasn't invincible. Also, Thea felt that Hera was more like a mage than a god. She didn't know if Hera didn't have enough divine power to begin with, or if there was another reason. She wanted to teleport over directly, but Hera reacted quickly and decisively closed the channel. The location of Olympus was not the same as the traditional concept of space. Without an accurate coordinate, she did not dare to rashly teleport. The feeling of being watched disappeared. Other than Zola, who was still a normal person, everyone could feel it. Hermes didn't know what happened, but he knew that Hera didn't stop watching because she was kind and valued peace. Seeing that Diana was staring at him and was about to throw Zola to him, Hermes had a lot of thoughts. He actually came up with an excuse. He immediately said, "I'll take Zola, but Hera has already noticed Paradise Island. You have to remind your mother to be careful." Then he pretended to leave. As expected, Diana immediately became alert when she heard the name Paradise Island. She grabbed Hermes' arm and asked nervously, "Paradise Island? You mean Hera has already seen my mother?" When Thea heard Hermes mention Paradise Island, she knew that things were bad. Hera had just lost, and it was inevitable that she would go to Paradise Island to vent her anger. Hera had turned the Amazons into snakes and turned Hippolyte into a stone statue. Who knew what choice she would make in this time and space, and it was better to be safe than sorry. Hippolyte and the others couldn't stop Hera at this time, even if Hera's strength was greatly reduced. If Diana wanted to go home, she couldn't stop her at all. She even had to agree, which made her sigh secretly. Hermes, who felt that Diana had fallen into his trap, wanted to howl at the sky. After spending a long time and countless brain cells dying, things finally returned to normal. "Thea, I want to go back. What do you think?" Diana hurriedly asked for her lover's opinion. Thea certainly couldn't object, but she also wouldn't jump into the enemy's ambush unprepared. Being able to win was one thing, but fighting to the death was another. She would be a fool if she didn't make use of her helpers. "Excuse me, how many gods have awakened now?" She asked the god of speed and thieves, who was known for being well-informed. Asking for information was his business scope. If he didn't know anything, it would be too suspicious. Hermes was a little hesitant, but he still answered, "Hera, the god of sun, Ares, the god of war, Eris, the goddess of strife, and Pluto and Neptune should have awakened." This guy only said most of it, but he didn't say anything about Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, who had colluded with him. He also didn't mention the goddess of moon, who had been Thea's boss for a short time, but Thea didn't feel the signal of the goddess of moon's arrival. Did she feel that she had enough divine power and didn't get involved in this matter? Thea felt that this was good news. After all, the goddess of moon still had a relationship with her, and it was always not good to fight with her. Ares. Diana didn't talk about Ares as if he had killed her father like 100 years ago, but her face didn't look too good either. Thea was analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of these people. The world had been peaceful for a long time, and coupled with the heavy blow 100 years ago, Ares's recent situation was worrying. The goddess of strife and the goddess of agriculture were not famous for fighting, and the only thing they needed to be wary of was the god of sun, Apollo. Unlike the goddess of moon, whose belief was scarce, the sun was an important prerequisite for the survival of the Earth's species. Even if it wasn't ancient times and no one in modern society believed in the god of sun, the accumulated belief still existed. As for his combat strength, Thea was a little uncertain. If the two of them fought against 4 or 5 weak gods at the same time, It was really difficult to predict the outcome, especially with the combat strength of the god of sun. She couldn't guarantee that she could defeat him. Fortunately, this world was full of surprises. 30 years ago, an alien spaceship landed on Earth and showed the Earthlings what the Kryptonian style was. Thea's idea was to find a Kryptonian to fight the god of Sunday, considering that they were going to fight on Paradise Island. They rejected all men, and Superman was directly excluded. Between Supergirl and Fiora, Thea chose Supergirl. This didn't mean that Fiora's combat strength was weak, but she couldn't walk away. In addition, Fiora's personality was too old-fashioned, and she wasn't suitable for the equally old-fashioned women of Paradise Island. On the contrary, the silly and ignorant Supergirl was very suitable, and Thea remembered that she had been to Paradise Island in the original time and space, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem. She told Diana that she was looking for reinforcements. She wasn't quite sure why Thea was so cautious, but they had been lovers for many years, so she chose to believe her. She also knew Supergirl, but they weren't familiar with each other. Thea quickly contacted Kara Danvers, who was studying in Nathaniel. The two had a good relationship. Thea treated her like a younger sister and often took her out to eat. She had to say that Kryptonians and Psions had something in common. They could eat too much, just casually treating her to a meal, and the number of swiping a credit card was chilling. Ordinary, rich people couldn't afford to eat like that. Kara Danvers came quickly. She was wearing blue tights, red boots, and a red cloak with a big S on her chest. Thea imitated Superman's clothes. Although they weren't as good as the one that Superman's father gave him, they were still of good quality and were more than enough to deal with ordinary battles. How is it? Isn't it very cool? Speaking of which, this was Supergirl's first time wearing her exclusive equipment in a battle. She flew very fast, and when she arrived at the location, she did not land immediately. Instead, she flew 2 rounds in the sky with her red cloak before landing. After greeting Diana, she asked Thea happily. Thea had plenty of ways to deal with this kind of older lowly. She coaxed and praised Supergirl until she burst out laughing. Hermes' expression was a little strange. At first, he didn't know what he was waiting for, and thought that Diana had seen through his trap. He pretended to take Zora away first several times, but Diana stopped him and hoped that they would act together. Only then did he relax. Then, he learned that there were reinforcements, so he could only wait quietly. Chapter 486. The arrival of Supergirl puzzled Hermes even more. There was no doubt that this girl did not have any divine power. Although Hermes' strength was now extremely weak, he was still sharp because of his past achievements. It was true that she did not have any divine power, but this woman was too strong. Her body was surging with energy, and her body structure was perfect to the extreme. Furthermore, this fellow's flying speed was extremely fast. Even when Hermes was at his peak, he might not be much faster than her. Would this woman be the culprit that would kill Hermes in the future? Hermes felt that he had tricked Diana into coming out today because he did not check the almanac. Accidents kept happening one after another. Thea did not pay much attention to Supergirl's thoughts. She discussed with Diana in a low voice. No matter what the road ahead is, we can crush it with our strength. Let's go back to Paradise Island first. Supergirl was very excited when she heard that they were going to Diana's hometown. When she knew that they might encounter enemies, she was even happier. The Kryptonian genes in her had been ignited by Fiora. She was so excited that she clenched her fists. This scene made Hermes' heart sink. He did not know about the existence of Kryptonians. He could only wonder if all the mortals were so strong and aggressive. What happened to the reverence for the gods? He had to continue playing the role of a spy. He patted his chest with righteous indignation and promised that he would not leave Zola and the child in her belly. Supergirl accidentally saw the child with her X-ray vision. Hermes, who had originally planned to keep the child as a trump card, was speechless. If he did not have only 1 year left to live, he would have gone back to his god's kingdom and become a corpse. Compared to Diana and Thea, Kara Danvers was at least a demigod. In Hermes' eyes, Thea might even have the bloodline of Zeus. But who was Kara Danvers? There was no divine power in Hermes' eyes, but this ordinary person's performance was too amazing. Hermes felt that no matter what he said or did, he would give himself away. He began to pretend to be invisible, but his injuries were healed by Thea. He could not pretend to be invisible even if he wanted to. If it were not for Diana, who was worried about Paradise Island, she would have discovered his problem. However, Thea had no intention of exposing him. This was not a game where him would drop a piece of equipment after him was killed. His clothes were torn and his pants were torn. Only his staff was a good item. It was a teleportation staff that ignored time and space. However, his staff was too closely connected to him. It was similar to Diana's silver bracelet of protection. Thea only glanced at him from the corner of her eye and stopped paying attention to him. Decades ago, Diana had returned to Paradise Island once. However, she did not have a good talk with Hippolyte. Most likely, Hippolyte had ordered her not to return to Paradise Island unless there was an emergency. Now, no matter what happened on Paradise Island, Diana had a proper reason to go back. With Thea by her side, there was no need to fly back. The two women's foreheads were close to each other. Diana passed a complicated coordinate of Paradise Island to Thea. This coordinate was extremely complicated. As a pure warrior, she could not understand it. Diana had to admire her mother's foresight. Thea had the same idea. She had only asked about Paradise Island once a long time ago. Seeing Diana's hesitation, she knew that Hippolyte must have given Diana a gag order in advance to prevent her from talking about Paradise Island. In the end, this old woman still treated Thea as an outsider. Being a member of the Amazon was nothing. If it were not for the fact that she was Diana's mother, Thea would not care about her at all. Hermes, who lowered his head and pretended to be invisible, found that Supergirl had been staring at him with a pair of big eyes. He smiled awkwardly. "Are you an alien?" Supergirl pointed at the bird's claws where Hermes' feet were supposed to be. Poor old god. How would he know anything about Earthlings and aliens? His brain, which used to be extremely witty, was now a mess. He could neither admit nor deny it. He could only smile and deal with it. This guy was a fool. Supergirl frowned her cute eyebrows and came to this conclusion. She looked at him with a little sympathy and patted him on the shoulder to encourage him. So strong. Supergirl's strength was far less natural than Superman's. These two pats almost caused Hermes internal injuries. He decided that he could not stay here any longer. He had to leave quickly. He took out his cane and was ready to volunteer. However, before he could say a word, Thea quickly and elegantly drew a fixed teleportation portal on the spot. With the coordinates provided by Diana and the portal being on Earth, Thea quickly finished drawing the teleportation portal. After checking it briefly, she stepped into it. Supergirl had already seen Thea's teleportation many times. She walked into the teleportation portal valiantly. "Come quickly," Diana called out to the remaining two people before entering the portal. Zola did not know where she was going or what she had to do. However, Thea, Diana, and Supergirl all looked kind. Compared to Hermes' beggar-like image, the three girls were more believable. Zola followed them and went through the portal. Hermes wanted to cry, but had no tears. What was this? He could tell that Diana did not take him seriously at all. She would not trust him either. However, he still had to continue this act. He swore in his heart that they would regret it later. He put away the ferocious expression on his face and returned to his weak self. He also followed Zola through the portal. As soon as he walked through the portal, he heard Supergirl, who seemed to be his nemesis, yelling about how warm the beach was and how beautiful the mountain was. Diana was delighted to hear that. Who wouldn't say that their hometown was good? Diana was already very friendly to Supergirl, and now she was explaining in detail to her. She talked about how she had climbed the mountains there when she was young, and how Antiope had trained her in combat by the sea many years ago. She even mentioned that this place wasn't far from the place where Steve Trevor had crashed. Diana even briefly recounted the great battle back then. However, after 10 minutes, she gradually fell silent and looked at Thea. Mother should know that I've returned to the island. Why haven't they appeared yet? Thea was also puzzled. The anti-magic spell is still in effect here. My supervision is not working here. Kara's probably not working either. Let's search with our naked eyes. The three of them immediately rose into the air and looked in 3 different directions. Kara, who had always been lucky, was the first to discover their target. There are many people in the southwest by the sea. Diana was very worried. She did not have time to greet the 2 onlookers on the ground and flew over first. Follow me. Thea waved at the 2 on the ground and chased after Zola with Kara. Can you fly? Zola, who felt that her worldview had been shattered, looked at Hermes uneasily. She still did not know why she had come here. She only knew that the fanatic Superman impersonator had looked at her stomach and said that she was pregnant. How could it be so exaggerated? She did not even notice it. How could that woman in blue tights and red cloak see through it? Chapter 487. Zola didn't want to follow them, but she didn't know where to go. There didn't seem to be any taxis nearby, so she could only ask Hermes for help. The god of speed and thieves was so angry that his nose almost went crooked when this old man was circling the earth at the speed of light. These women were still nowhere to be found. He forced himself to hold it in. Of course I can fly. He bitterly followed them with Zola in his arms. However, after flying for a short distance, Zola had another question. You don't seem to fly as fast as them. She wasn't a scientist and didn't have a speed detector, but she had seen the sonic boom when Supergirl flew. As someone who had received modern education, she could tell that Supergirl was at least close to the speed of sound. On the other hand, Hermes, who was carrying her, was flying slowly and unsteadily. The difference between their speeds was like comparing a wooden plane to a 5th-generation fighter jet. Hermes wanted to let go of her and drop her to death, but it was just a thought. There were too many implications, and he couldn't handle it with his small arms and legs. Zola pestered him twice and could only force herself to answer. If she said that she wasn't as good as others, especially in the field of speed, she would die at any moment. Luckily, Hermes was smart and quickly thought of a key point. He said earnestly, I'm doing this for you. Your body can't withstand the impact of high speed. Don't worry, they'll be fine. Let's fly slowly. Zola felt that it made sense and accepted the answer without hesitation. Not to mention the 2 who were flying slowly. The 3 women had already landed. Supergirl was the fastest, followed by Diana, and Thea, who didn't have her light ring, was the last. Mother! Diana saw Hippolyte standing in front of everyone at a glance, and the strong goddess of war also shed tears. The innocent Supergirl also seemed to think of her family and was a bit sad. Thea didn't have such rich emotions. She first looked at the opposite side. The woman standing in front of her was none other than Hera, who had exchanged blows with her from a distance 10 minutes ago. At this moment, the Divine Empress was dressed to the nines. She wore an emerald green floor-length dress and a cloak woven from peacock feathers. This cloak was of a very high grade and was at least a high-grade divine artifact. The bracelets and earrings she wore on her person all had divine artifact fluctuations. At this moment, Hera looked majestic as she looked at the people of Paradise Island as if she was looking at a group of ants. The javelins and bows of the female warriors were like toys in her eyes, not worth her attention at all. On his left was a purple-skinned man. This man did not wear any artifacts and was dressed in cheap clothes from a street stall. Thea estimated that this guy's clothes did not cost more than $5. However, his casual attitude made Thea even more vigilant. He did not need any artifacts, which meant that he had a deep background. Compared to him, the fully armed Hera was a little inferior. If he wasn't mistaken, this man was the sun god Apollo. The woman on Hera's right was very interesting. Compared to the sun god and the divine empress, this woman had no fighting spirit. She wore a miniskirt, revealing a large part of her lotus-colored skin. She looked at everyone frivolously. The divine empress Hera, the sun god Apollo, the goddess of strife Eris. Thea nodded secretly. The goddess of agriculture and her old friend Ares were not here. She could totally deal with this lineup. Seeing that Diana and Hippolyte had a few simple words, Thea, who was relieved, also turned to salute Hippolyte, just like how Diana treated Moira. She also saluted Hippolyte as a junior to an elder. "Long time no see, Your Majesty. Your body is still healthy. Congratulations. You too, partner of Diana. You are also my child. I sincerely thank you for your selfless help to Diana." Seeing that Hera and the others had no intention of attacking, Thea and Hippolyte chatted for a while before introducing Supergirl. "This is our friend, Kara Danvers, who is like my sister." Thea pulled Supergirl over and introduced her. "Paradise Island also welcomes you. I can see that you are a brave warrior and a good child." Thea could also guess what Hippolyte was thinking. Paradise Island had suffered a great calamity. At this time, she would welcome anyone who came to help. Moreover, Supergirl looked silly and simple, which was more in line with the Amazon tradition. "Have you discussed the order of death? Hades is waiting for you." Hera spoke first in an overbearing manner. Who is going to talk to her? Thea and Diana glanced at Hippolyte and found that the queen was a little ashamed. As a mistress, she was indeed a little guilty when facing the main wife. It didn't seem appropriate for Diana to talk. As the daughter of Zeus, at least nominally, Hera had jurisdiction over her. The people of the present generation didn't care, but the ancient Amazons were very restrained. Now that she could talk to the guardian of the universe, Thea didn't have any scruples with the improvement of her strength. She stepped out first. "Your Majesty, no one will die today because of the battle. I am very sure of this." Her words caused Hera's gaze to shift from Diana. She sensed a little and found out. Wasn't this the person who fought with her 10 minutes ago? At that time, things happened in a hurry. She didn't even see clearly whether the enemy was a man or a woman. Now, she could finally take a closer look. There was no doubt about the level of a demigod. However, Hera couldn't tell which divine system the other party was from. It seemed to have the shadow of the Greek divine system. She could also see traces of the Egyptian divine system. She couldn't make a judgment for a while. Thea had transformed into a hero spirit several times. She had already converted all the divine power. Without tracing back to the source, she couldn't see clearly. Right now, she was like a newly born demigod. Even Hera, who grasped the authority of the gods, couldn't see through her origins. However, the arrogant Hera still glanced at her. "You can't save them, even with the help of that Amazon." Hera glanced at the two demigods. On the other side, the Supergirl was completely ignored by her. "How about we go outside the island to fight? It's hard to fight here. Thea didn't like the environment of Paradise Island. Once she entered, more than half of her magic power was sealed. However, her physical fitness was still there. She didn't know if the restrictions on the island were loosened or if it was Hera's doing. Plus, she didn't want to fight with Hera. It was meaningless. If you want to kill the firstborn, go ahead. As long as you don't involve Diana, you can fight freely behind closed doors. However, the other party didn't intend to be kind at all. Hera sneered and took out a dark brown seal with lightning engravings. She crushed it with a malicious sneer. Thea, who could be called a great sorcerer in ancient times, immediately sensed that the anti-magic enchantment of Paradise Island had lost its effect. Her supervision magic power was restored. Chapter 488. What followed was a heart-palpitating pain, but this feeling came and went quickly. Thea realized that something was wrong and hurriedly retreated. She saw the Amazons with arrows and guns lying on the ground. Hippolyte was half kneeling on the ground, and even Diana was holding on with a painful expression. This was a special countermeasure set up to target the enchantment of Paradise Island and its residents. Thea instantly understood that the heart-palpitating feeling was because she had also lived on the island for half a year. However, this little magic impact was nothing to Thea, and she returned to normal in 2 breaths. Now, only Supergirl and herself were in good condition. How are you? Thea had no time to care about the people on Paradise Island. She first checked on Diana. She tried to use a few healing spells, but unfortunately, the effect was not great. The opponent targeted the entire island, and the closer the connection with the island, the greater the damage. The female warriors directly fainted. Antiope and Hippolyte were barely conscious, but the 2 of them could not recover their combat power in a short time. With Thea's continuous healing and a part of her willpower, Diana's condition was slightly stabilized, but she could not fight for a long time. You rest first, leave this to me. She, who had fully recovered her magic, did not mind fighting a few rounds with Hera. Just when Thea was about to open her mouth to ask for a fight, Apollo stood up proudly and said without turning his head, "Hera, you still like to use those little tricks. Are these mortals worth my effort, or are you at the same level as them? Apollo, you have to respect me. I am the Queen of Gods." Hera felt that Apollo's words were too harsh and roared with extreme dissatisfaction, but her voice was a little weak. Apollo snorted coldly and looked at the enemy opposite him. He shook his head at the pale face of Diana and ignored Supergirl. He looked at Thea with some curiosity. "Your strength is not bad. Do you want to be my opponent?" Thea did not mind fighting a few rounds with him. She could more or less absorb sunlight, but the effect was not as strong as the Kryptonians. However, if she were to face Apollo, then Hera, who was proficient in magic, would naturally be left to Supergirl. This wasn't the best plan. Thea sneered. "Beat my sister first. Kara, teach him a lesson." Apollo wasn't the only one who was surprised. Even Supergirl herself was a little surprised. That purple-skinned guy in front of her looked so arrogant. Could she do it? Don't worry, he's no match for you. When Thea saw the bitter look on Supergirl's face, she hurriedly cheered her on. Then, without giving her any time to react, she pushed her out. Other than the parallax monster that had wreaked havoc in Seaside City and the giant Axeman's attack, this could be said to be Supergirl's 3rd serious battle. She clenched her fists tightly, and her chest, which was not considered large, appeared slightly curved due to her deep breaths. After a period of hard training by Fiora, Supergirl's fighting style was finally starting to look a little better. She was no longer using the standard farmer fighting style of the Iyer family. Instead, she was now in an offensive and defensive posture, waiting for the enemy to attack first. "Ha ha!" Supergirl's slightly nervous look made Apollo laugh. He laughed while pointing at Supergirl. A child. They actually sent a child to be my opponent. Pay attention to the strength of your attack. Just kill a mortal and leave the rest to me. I want to properly deal with them, Hera said fiercely. Apollo shook his head with some pity. He looked at Supergirl, who was so nervous that her eyes were a little straight. What value did an opponent like her have to prove that she was worthy of inheriting the throne of the God King? It was extremely boring. He originally thought that there would be a big battle on Paradise Island, but he didn't expect Hera to use her ultimate move. Apollo was very frustrated that he couldn't show off his power as the sun god. He swung his hand, and a scorching ball of light was thrown at Supergirl. In Apollo's impression, no mortal could withstand his attack. He lost interest and walked back. However, after taking 2 steps, he realized that something was wrong. He stopped and turned around abruptly. When the dust settled, he saw that Supergirl was still in the same position. Apollo's attack was fast and ruthless. She didn't even have time to react before she was hit. However, the opponent's fierce attack didn't hurt Supergirl. She wasn't very sensitive to her own energy. She only vaguely felt that she had gained some benefits. But how was this possible? This purple-skinned guy in front of her was obviously very powerful. Why didn't he hurt her? Supergirl, who had little combat experience, didn't think about the problem of sunlight. If it were Superman or Fiora, they would have understood immediately. She had little combat experience, but Apollo had plenty of combat experience. However, he didn't know about the Kryptonians. Looking at Supergirl cautiously guarding against her, she, who believed herself to be intelligent, was truly confused. She, who had been through hundreds of battles, was very certain that she had hit her opponent. However, seeing that Supergirl was completely unharmed, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Since he couldn't figure it out, he decided to fire again. This time, Apollo was serious. He bent his body slightly, bent his arm, and made a gesture of accumulating energy. Then he raised his right hand. A dark yellow energy beam, filled with a lot of light and heat, was thrown at Supergirl. This time, it wasn't a sudden attack. Supergirl reacted quickly. According to her previous combat experience, she should have retaliated or dodged the attack with heat rays. However, her combat instinct told her that she didn't need to retaliate. She just needed to take the attack head-on. It was safe and harmless. Supergirl, who was very simple, was confused. However, relying on combat instinct was the style of the Iyer family. Without thinking, she closed her eyes and slammed into the energy beam head-on. Boom! There was a loud bang. Apollo was completely dumbfounded when he saw that Supergirl was once again unscathed except for a little bit of mess on her body. He had already predicted several possible responses from her, such as dodging or counterattacking. These choices were not strange at all. However, Supergirl's reaction really surprised him. How did she deal with it? She was stunned for a moment and chose to use her body to take the attack head-on. Apollo didn't know what to say. Thea saw this scene and laughed out loud. Diana, who also knew about the Kryptonians' characteristics, also smiled. At this time, she realized that her opponent's attack couldn't hurt her. Instead, it replenished her energy. Supergirl was simple, but she wasn't stupid. She also guessed that her opponent's attack had something to do with the yellow sun. Supergirl's body had absorbed all the energy contained in the 2 attacks. Now, her energy had increased by at least 10%. If this energy was exposed to the sun, it would take at least half a year. Supergirl, who had always been troubled by the fact that Superman was stronger than her, seemed to have seen the wonderful scene of her teaching her cousin a lesson. She laughed happily. Chapter 489. What the hell are you laughing at? The 3 of them mocked him one after another, and Apollo's face darkened. as a general of the Greek pantheon, and now the self-proclaimed successor of the god king, Apollo was furious. The energy in his body surged, and golden flames spewed out of his eyes, mouth, ears, and nose. Apollo's expression was ferocious. This island had looked down on his authority, and he wanted to sink Paradise Island. In your dreams. Thea swung her hand and shot a shadow arrow. Since Apollo was full of light energy, the shadow arrow could delay him for a moment, and naturally, he could not launch his next attack. Hera's reaction was not slow either. She seemed to be in the lead, but her divine power was far inferior to Apollo's. Seeing Thea blocking her, she did not want to be outdone, and shot a water arrow to counter the shadow arrow. Thea immediately returned the favor. Spells of various colors covered the sky and covered the earth as she threw them over. The goddess of strife, Eris, was sneering at the side and had no intention of interfering. Hera could only brace herself. As the queen of Zeus and the mother of most of the main gods in name, she was very accomplished in magic. If not for the fact that she had lost too much, Thea would not have been able to defeat her. The two of them began an intense magic exchange, and on the other side, Supergirl also began to attack Apollo. Boom! There was an explosion. Apollo's attack was not completed in the end, and he was interrupted by Supergirl before he could accumulate more than half of his energy. However, his use of divine power was very unique. He moved the center of the energy explosion to the front, which was between himself and Supergirl. His plan was good. His own energy could not hurt himself, but Supergirl would not be able to take it head-on, right? However, the result made him collapse. He was indeed fine, but Supergirl was fine too. The adorable Supergirl's energy increased by a lot, and the scene of her teaching her cousin Superman a lesson appeared in her mind. The little girl was very excited, and she threw a punch at Apollo's face with great force. The power of Apollo's ultimate move was indeed extraordinary. Although the center of the explosion was between him and Supergirl, there were still some aftershocks that wreaked havoc in all directions. Hera lightly shook the peacock feather coat on her body to block the impact. Sia herself could absorb sunlight and had no defense. However, the people of Paradise Island did not have the ability to do so. Diana was a pure warrior, and she could not defend such a large area. Thea could only hurriedly set up a defensive shield to block Apollo's remaining energy impact. However, this distraction allowed Hera to gain the upper hand. I can handle it. Seeing that Diana wanted to help, Thea stopped her. The attitude of the goddess of strife, Eris, was unclear. As a reserve, Diana could not play. Several energies gathered in his body, and he raised his hand to send a bolt of lightning towards Hera. Unexpectedly, the other party was instantly enraged. I'm Zeus's wife. How dare you use lightning against me? It turned out that Hera, as the wife of Zeus, also knew lightning spells, but she didn't usually use them. Thea exchanged a few blows with Hera and found that the lightning spells made Hera a little hysterical and made her lose her judgment. Thea was secretly pleased and quietly turned the situation around. Diana stared at Eris, the goddess of strife, with full concentration. However, Eris did not help. Instead, she took out a glass of wine from the void and drank it leisurely. From time to time, she would say a few sarcastic words. Mother, be careful. You need your daughter's help? Little girl in the red cloak, be careful. Apollo is going to hit your shoulder. From her long-winded words, one could not tell which side she was on. It seemed that the victory of either side had nothing to do with her. Diana threw out the lasso of truth. She did not resist, and continued to say what she wanted to say. If one did not consider that her power was much higher than the rule of truth, it meant that every word she said was true. She wanted to instigate everyone to continue fighting, and the more heated the fight, the better. When she saw that someone's momentum was weak, she would start to instigate with her 3-inch tongue. She would only stop when both sides were fighting in full swing. Diana tried to block his mouth, but it was of no use. His voice was still transmitted to the few of them. Conflict and instigation, this was her priesthood, her nature. Of the 4 people in the field, Hera and Apollo were naturally familiar with her style. Thea was bombarded by the media, but it went in one ear and out the other. Supergirl was affected a lot. Fortunately, she had the absolute upper hand, so the impact was not too great. Apollo was very depressed. With many years of battle experience, he could still see that the opponent had a physique that absorbed sunlight. Although this type of enemy was rare, it was not like he had never seen it before. Not to mention those far away, he could see that Thea also had such a physique. However, the physique that absorbed sunlight in Apollo's impression was completely different from the one in the red cloak in front of him. She absorbed it too quickly and used it at a high rate. The two of them exchanged more than 10 blows. Apollo had used up 20% of his energy, while the opponent had increased it by 20%. His own energy had become someone else's energy almost without any loss. How could he continue fighting? If Supergirl were to use energy attacks like heat rays, Apollo would be able to suck them back. However, Supergirl was determined not to let Apollo use his ultimate move. She decided to use physical attacks to fight in close combat, causing Apollo to suffer greatly. He was the sun god. In order to pursue the purity of power, he had also eliminated impurities like Thea. Now, he only had light element attacks. He could not win in close combat, and his energy attacks were absorbed. In addition, Eris would spout nonsense from time to time. Apollo was so frustrated that he wanted to bang his head against the wall. He wanted to change opponents with Thea. He had seen her physique. She could only absorb a part of the light. As long as he increased his energy output, he would definitely be able to injure her. Although it was very tiring to fight, he could at least hit her a few times. The Supergirl in front of him was beating him to the point that he could not fight back at all. Apollo hurriedly gave Hera a look. Then he despaired. Hera was burning with jealousy. God knew what she was thinking. She was fighting against Thea with lightning magic. Even if Apollo died in front of her, she would not look at him, let alone give him a look. Stupid teammate. Apollo did not know this term, but the meaning was the same. Although it would damage his dignity as the sun god, he could make a strategic change today. Apollo's only thought was whether to drag these 2 ignorant women with him or run alone. However, it was not that easy for him to run away. Diana had already seen through the situation on the battlefield. He did not have to worry about Thea and Hera for now. At their current level, they would not be able to win in 3 or 4 days. She rushed out diagonally and stopped Apollo, who was about to run away. Supergirl's combat experience was average, but Diana was a veteran. The main damage was absorbed by Supergirl. Since she had not recovered from her injuries, she stabbed Apollo in the back. It was basically a defensive warrior throwing away his shield and turning into a thief. Hermes, who had arrived late with Zola, arrived at the battlefield and saw the stalemate. Chapter 490. The sound and light effects of Thea and Hera's magic were dazzling. The whole ground was plowed by their magic. Zora's mouth was wide open. This must be a dream, right? Zola, who had never lived in the metropolis, doubted the authenticity of Superman. Were the 2 women who could summon lightning, frost, and fire real? She felt that tonight's experience was just a figment of her imagination, a nightmare that wasn't too scary. These people had pulled her here for no reason, and the main reason was that this was her dream. That was why she was here. Hermes didn't care about Zora's thoughts. It was fine as long as she was alive. The change in plan was too big. Hermes's original intention of using Zora to be friends with Diana had been extinguished. He turned to the other side, and his eyes almost popped out. He saw Supergirl and Diana pressing Apollo to the ground and beating him up like a dead dog. Was this the sun god who had fought for tens of thousands of years and was now ambitious enough to inherit the throne? Hermes's power had decreased tremendously, but his vision was still there. He could see that Diana was injured and hadn't even used half of her true power. It was the red-cloaked girl who was beating Apollo up. Was this really a normal person nowadays? She was so fast that even Hermes was surprised. There was no need to talk about her strength. He could tell just by looking at how Apollo was beaten up. Was this young girl going to kill a god? Then she would get his position as the god of speed and directly ascend to the throne? Hermes was having a headache. At this moment, Supergirl punched Apollo in the chest with great force. Apollo spat out a mouthful of golden blood. Thea, who was fighting with Hera, was instantly attracted. God's blood wasn't that easy to obtain. It was useless to her, but it was still effective for the people at home. Apollo's blood attracted Thea, and naturally, it also attracted Hermes in the sky. The sun god, who had been unharmed for tens of thousands of years, was now injured by a human. If this incident was thrown into Homer's epic, it would be several hundred words long. There were very few people in the audience right now, but other than Supergirl, everyone else knew the truth. Apollo was going to die. Hermes felt a toothache. Apollo had spread the word that the eldest son of Zeus would kill one of them and ascend to the throne of God. Now, he had not even seen the shadow of the firstborn, and he, the rumor-monger, was about to die. After much consideration, Hermes decided to overturn his original plan. If the soft approach didn't work, then he would use the hard approach. He only had one chance to use his killing move. Who should he give this chance to? Diana was definitely out of the question. She was needed for the follow-up. There was also no need for a Supergirl. She was purely an ordinary person. Naturally, the only one left was Thea. Hermes did not have a good impression of this unexpected intruder. Furthermore, she was the one who called the Supergirl who wanted to kill Apollo. Hermes made up his mind. Looking at Hera, who was entangled with Thea, Hermes sneered in his heart. "You guys can have fun." He took out a feather from the void. This was one of the tricks he had left behind when he was at his peak. The power of the feather represented the highest level of the god of speed and thieves. He pinched the feather with 2 fingers on his right hand and threw it at the center of the battle between Thea and Hera. This was a reverse transmission magic circle. The principle was not complicated. The feather stuck on the ground would connect the ground and the underworld. As for the people on the ground, they would naturally enter the underworld directly. At first, Hermes only wanted to replace Thea, but when he thought of Hades's instructions, he did not feel guilty at all and took Hera in as well. Once he made a move, all his previous disguises would be useless. Without hesitation, he grabbed Zola, who still wanted to watch the show, and directly activated the divine staff to teleport away. His feather was as light as a gust of wind. It was inserted vertically in the middle of Thea and Hera's battlefield, because it was not aimed at the two, but at the ground. Neither of them sensed it. When the transmission began, Thea was shocked. What was that? "Hermes, don't you dare!" Hera shouted loudly, but the transmission was so fast that both of them were one step too late. The ground within a radius of 100 meters, and the two of them were instantly transferred to the other side. Thea only heard Diana's shout before the transmission began. Seeing that Hera had wrapped herself up tightly with the peacock cloak, Thea also took out the light ring, conjured a big house, and went in. It was the first time that Hera had seen such a strange trick. After hesitating for a moment, she wrapped herself into a ball with the peacock cloak and squatted on the ground. Seeing that Thea did not close the door, Hera also went in shyly. "What trick is Hermes using?" Thea asked while maintaining the conjuration to resist the turbulence of time and space. Although the two of them were still fighting fiercely 10 seconds ago, Hera was very practical and immediately began to turn the enemy into a friend. Hera, who had been putting on airs all this time, said proudly, "That thief only knows how to do 2 transmissions. He used this trick before. It should be the exchange of the underworld." The underworld? The place of Hades? Hera's expression was very ugly. She nodded and observed the golden conjured house again. This was definitely not magic, but what was it? She asked embarrassedly. "How long can this thing last?" Thea smiled. Now that her light ring could amplify emotions by 200 times, and she controlled the total energy of the yellow light, she could maintain this low-intensity consumption as long as there were still feelings of fear in the universe. But there was no need to tell Hera the truth. She avoided the topic and said, "It should last for a while. You don't look well. Do you have a long-cherished wish with Hades?" Thea used the trick of coaxing middle-aged women again. She lowered her posture and slowly began to talk. Hera felt that this opponent from 10 seconds ago was not so detestable. Most importantly, Hera could see that Thea and Zeus were not related, at least not in terms of bloodline. This made Hera's attitude much more relaxed. Although Hera was still arrogant, she could still answer 2 out of 3 questions. Thea had a rough idea of the situation. In fact, Hera wasn't as bad as the legends made her out to be. She was extremely loyal to her love. It was just that Zeus was too much of a playboy. He repeatedly threw his love into the pool, which made Hera a little hysterical at times. But even so, Hera did not betray their love. She and Zeus only had 2 men and 3 women. The rest of the men and women in the Greek gods were all illegitimate children. Of course, this included Diana. Even the strongest woman could not bear to face the dozens of illegitimate children her husband had created for her every day. The patriarchal society ignored Hera's loyal love and forced Hera to be jealous. This was a terrible thing. Zeus, who was a playboy, was praised. Hera, who carefully protected her love, was criticized as useless. Hera, who was proud, did not bother to explain. The more she explained, the worse it got. Chapter 491. Thea could only say that every hateful person had a pitiful side to them. Zeus, who was full of love, was largely responsible for Hera's current state of disgrace. She didn't even need to put herself in Hera's shoes. Any woman with a clear mind would have done 10 times or even 100 times worse than Zeus. She sighed and comforted Zeus, and the 2 of them tacitly raised their relationship to neutral. With a slight tremor, the vibrations around the house stopped, and the 2 of them landed on the underworld. "We seem to have arrived. Do you have a way to go back?" Thea put away her light ring. She was still wearing her casual outfit of a red windbreaker, black pants, and long boots. She put her hands in her pockets and looked around solemnly. She didn't know how to use her teleportation spell in this godforsaken place. Even the basic rules of teleportation were different from those on Earth. Thea only tried twice, and layers of obscure energy blocked her spatial positioning. "This is Hades's place. I've never been here before," Hera said vaguely. Thea had been trying to get information out of her, so she had a rough understanding of their relationship. Hera was in a very cliché position when it came to the appointment of the God King. Even though Thea felt that the position of the God King was most likely a trap set by Zeus, the remaining gods of the Greek pantheon had to get Hera's approval if they wanted to be the God King. The juniors had to make some deals with Hera if they wanted to be recognized. For example, the arrogant Apollo was willing to be Hera's bodyguard, for once because of this reason. As Zeus's brother, Hades, the emperor of the sea, didn't have to go through so much trouble. They wanted to marry Hera directly, but the Queen of the Sea would definitely not agree. This was the crux of the conflict between the two sides. Hera was usually cooped up in Mount Olympus, so it was fine if she didn't want to. But now that she was tricked by Hermes, the two of them were in the underworld, so it was a little awkward. Seeing that Hera was helpless, Thea shrank her neck again. It was too cold here. The sky was gray, and so was the ground. There was a bone-piercing chill in the air. This place was not like the natural environment where it was a few dozen degrees below zero. It was literally cold, and it was indifferent to all life. It wasn't that there wasn't a way to go back. At the very least, Zeus' lightning arrow would definitely allow her to go back. If even time could travel, the small space barrier in front of her wouldn't be a problem. However, considering Hera's emotions, she decided to use another method. That was to use force. Using the prayers of all living beings to teleport the two of them back would consume an astronomical amount of prayers. Thea still wanted to hook up with the Origin, so she didn't want to waste her prayers here. Her plan was to modify the laws of space in a short period of time and teleport them back. Just as she was about to take action, she saw that the previously silent and gloomy space seemed to have received some kind of command, and this space was slowly coming to life. The gray clouds in the sky were gradually approaching. Upon closer inspection, they were not clouds at all. They were the skeletons of countless birds. Some of them were already badly damaged, and some of them could still be seen. Compared to the silently approaching skeletal birds, the abnormalities on the ground were more shocking. On the surrounding walls and between the rocks, there were countless filthy corpses crawling out. The ground under their feet also had countless human hands and rotting heads. There were men and women, old and young. From the eyes of the corpses, one could see only hatred. Hatred for the world, hatred for the living. Ouch! Thea looked at the scene and felt a little depressed. The things in front of them could frighten a mortal, but for her and Hera, it was just a matter of a few fireballs. The only thing to note was that Thea had a slight obsession with cleanliness. Facing the wall full of corpses, the filthy environment, coupled with the thick smell of countless corpses, made her cover her nose. Hera, who was presented with a luxurious and elegant image, was also uncomfortable. She wrinkled her nose, squinted her eyes, and choked on the smell. What made the two of them look sideways was that countless corpses began to crazily gather again. Large masses of flesh and blood were forcefully mixed together, and countless extravasated blood was squeezed out. The gray ground was covered with a thick and dense layer of dark blood. Such a heavy taste made Thea grit her teeth. The mass of flesh and blood didn't care whether she was disgusted or not, and forcibly turned into a giant face that was dozens of meters tall. The face's outline could be seen vaguely, and the mouth opened, and a muddy voice slowly came out. "Hera, are you here to be my bride?" Realizing that Hera was ignoring her, Thea, who was about to pull out the peerless holy sword, stopped. Her friendship with Hera could only be described as an enemy and was far from being friends. There was no need to stand up for Hera. As it turned out, Hera didn't intend to let Thea stand up for her. She was silent, and in an instant, her body became 50 meters tall, looking at Hades's giant face that was made of flesh and blood of the dead. Thea gave Hera a thumbs up. This move was really good, and the ability to attract hatred had reached the maximum level. After Hera became bigger, no one paid attention to a small character like her. This move had no other use except for being cool. Enlarging the body would make it easier for the opponent to attack, and it would reduce Hera's agility. At the same time, the consumption of divine power per unit of time began to increase. Thea casually looked at it and found a basket of problems. But no one paid attention to her, so she was naturally happy to watch the show. The environment in front of her was just a little dirty and smelly. "Open your dirty door and let us leave." Hera didn't know how to negotiate at all, and she gave a rigid order. The only good news was that Hera had a good heart and even brought Thea along. Hades was angered by Hera's tone, and the giant face made of flesh and blood seemed to tremble a few times. "Come to my throne and have a good talk." After that, the giant face of flesh and blood turned into mud and scattered on the ground. Countless corpses and zombies crawled out from the ground, and countless death knights gathered not far away. Giants that had lost their minds and monsters that had been killed in myths and legends appeared one after another. The sea of dead covered a radius of hundreds of miles, and a small path that was as wide as two people suddenly appeared. This should be the path that led to Hades's throne. "Are you really going to go there?" Thea pulled Hera, who had turned back to her normal size and was about to walk in. "You have a way?" Hera looked at her curiously. Thea roughly explained her idea, and Hera shook her head after hearing it. "Time is too tight. They won't give us much time to prepare." Thea also admitted this. Once she focused on rewriting the rules, it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes. During this time, Hera would need to fend off the monsters outside. First, there was the issue of trust. Hera was not Diana, and she would not risk her life to protect Thea. Chapter 492. Thea wouldn't put her safety in the hands of someone who was her enemy just a few minutes ago. She wasn't that careless. Besides, even if Hera was trustworthy, she wouldn't be able to fend off the densely packed monsters around her. Some of them looked strange and didn't look easy to deal with. Thea only took a few glances. There were a few that had been recorded in myths. There was the legendary Aramani, who competed with Athena in weaving and now had a woman's upper body and a spider's lower body. There was also the weird-looking two-headed lizard that claimed to be able to cure rheumatism. This thing didn't have 2 heads in the traditional sense, but one in the front and one in the back. There were also the eyeless Medusa and the 3-headed hellhound that was missing 2 heads. Thea was dazzled by all the things she knew and didn't know. As for killing their way out and finding a secluded place to slowly study the spatial coordinates, this was unrealistic. The entire underworld was Hades' territory. As long as they were still in this world, Hades would be able to catch up with them. If they wanted to rely on the 2 of them to kill all the monsters in the underworld, this was extremely difficult. "Hey, how's your skill? I'll attract Hades' attention in a while, and you take down one of the candles on his head. We'll be able to leave the underworld smoothly." They couldn't run for the time being, and they weren't in a hurry to fight. They could only walk slowly along the path that the other party had left behind. After walking for a short distance, Hera finally came up with a plan. Thea definitely couldn't brag that she was one of the current generation's grandmasters of combat, and that she was proficient in both magic and martial arts. As for how Hades's candle would be used, whether it would directly open a gate or a teleportation point somewhere, Hera wasn't sure either. After all, no one had ever done something like this before. Hera only knew this information because Zeus had told her back then. The two constantly revised their plan on the road. There was nothing much to say. The more detailed the plan, the easier it was to make mistakes. Just look at how Hermes had continuously used the trick of sowing discord. The 2 of them didn't walk far before they entered a city. It was an ancient city made of bricks and stones. The roads were neatly repaired, but there were no waves of living people. There were no flowers in the nearby flower beds, and there was no water in the distant fountain. It was so quiet and empty that only their footsteps could be heard. Thea felt that the air here was so heavy that she couldn't breathe. The holy sword in her body kept rumbling, as if it wanted her to leave this place as soon as possible. "Calm down, little girl." Hera thought she was a little nervous. Thea did not say anything. She tried her best to suppress the holy sword so that it would not jump out on its own. This was her current job. The holy sword hated this place very much. Thea could only coax it so that it would not jump out and start a massacre. Although the journey was long, there was always an end. Not long after entering the city, there was a group of black-armored knights escorting or monitoring them as they walked in. In the center of the city, Thea finally saw the famous Hades. She felt a little disappointed. None of the old gods were pleasing to her eyes. In his memory, there were people who commented that these old gods had been turned into punks, and it was not false at all. The goddesses were still okay. At least they still looked human. The Hades in front of him was simply a joke. He was less than 5 meters tall, and wore a nondescript red and black outfit. Of course, the most eye-catching thing was his shining head. It was like a birthday cake on his head. 7 or 8 candles were stuck on his head, and the sticky wax was all over his face. He had no hair or eyes, and only some traces of his mouth could be seen. He wanted to marry Hera and Diana with such a ghastly appearance. Thea was already preparing a big move to give this bastard a good beating. When Hades saw the two of them arrive, he acted like a fat leader of some country and clapped his hands twice in a very fake manner. A few ghost nannies who did not need to wear makeup for horror movies magically rushed out, each of them holding a set of wedding clothes in their hands. It seemed like they wanted Hera to choose from. Not far away, 2 guards of honor walked over. The ones beating the drums were members of Heifer's tribe, who had a good relationship with Thea. They were 2 3-meter-tall male minotaurs. Many humans stood behind the minotaurs, holding all kinds of musical instruments. They should be the humans who were good at singing and dancing during the Greek era. After their deaths, they fell into the hands of Hades. Of course, Hades would not be unprepared. He had gathered the army further away. In his eyes, Hera was a piece of meat on the chopping board, and he could do whatever he wanted with her. As for Thea, who was she? The old Hades had never heard of her before. Change into the new clothes. As my bride, this is your destiny. Hera, in order to celebrate my ascension to the throne of the God King, I will keep some things for you. Is the one beside you your maid? You can keep her. Hades's expression could not be seen clearly because of the candlelight on his head. He thought for a while, as if the other party was just an ant, and everything was under his control to decide their fate. He looked at Thea's appearance twice. Firstly, Hades did not know this woman, which meant that she was a nobody. Secondly, Thea's appearance and figure leaned towards the modern era. In Hades' eyes, she was just ordinary. This was the difference between ancient and modern aesthetics. Nowadays, it was difficult to distinguish between Thea and Diana's appearance. Modern people generally thought that Thea was slightly more pleasing to the eye, but in Hades' eyes, he would think that Diana was prettier. Thea was at most a maid to him. At this time, Hera was not angry at being treated as a maid. After seeing Hades, the holy sword kept sending a message, and that was to chop him up. Seeing that she was about to lose control, Thea's forehead was sweating, which made Hades even more proud. She was trembling in fear of his supreme divine power, which meant that Hades's power was still sufficient. Although there was a faint sense of uneasiness, Hades thought that it was because of some trump card in Hera's hand. As the queen of Zeus, it was normal for her to have a few weapons of mass destruction in her hands. Hades had been using words to test Hera and even infuriate her. He wanted to see if she had any other tricks up her sleeve. The little follower beside Hera was automatically ignored by him. For so many years, Hades did not have the habit of probing other people's energy. In his inherent knowledge, no one was stronger than him except for Zeus. Even Poseidon Boston was slightly weaker than him. Now, you want him to probe Hera's maid. Isn't this a joke? Seeing that Hera did not say anything, Hades felt that she probably did not have any trump cards left, so he ordered the Anababas to pass them the clothes. He was in a hurry. Take it, quickly change into it. One of the Anababas took out a piece of tattered clothes and handed it to Thea with a contemptuous tone. She did not know that she had almost poked a hole in the sky. Get lost, you bunch of ants. Hera could not hold it in any more. Chapter 493. Just as Anababa's bony hand was about to touch Thea's shoulder, a dazzling light shot up into the sky, and the dark world suddenly seemed to have an extra ray of light. This was something that the dead once had. This was the power of emotion. This was the light that once bloomed in life. The heavy and harsh environment of the underworld, which had operated for tens of thousands of years, suddenly had some vitality. Many dead people who had fallen for tens of thousands of years recalled their ancient memories. Their filthy eyes shed tears, and their dead bodies seemed to be injected with vitality again. This process was extremely short, but its significance was incomparably far-reaching. Thea finally took out the holy sword when she couldn't bear it anymore. This was a top-level artifact that symbolized the will of all living beings. Just the aftermath of the holy sword itself vaporized Anababa, who was the fuse, so she went all out. Holding the holy sword with one hand, she ran a few steps and arrived in front of the stunned Hades. "Grandson, I've long disliked you." After saying that, she didn't wait for Hades to reply, and swung her right hand horizontally. The holy sword sensed her thoughts and knew that she was about to kill Hades. Even if it was just a clone, the holy sword was still very excited. The seven-colored light flashed continuously, and the person and the sword cooperated seamlessly. Hades's head, which was covered in wax, was cut off horizontally. Hades shouldn't be so weak. It was hard to say who would win if the two of them fought fairly. However, his attention was attracted by the turmoil in the underworld. He didn't care about the countless walking corpses, but the strong corpses that he had painstakingly collected were showing signs of going out of control. For example, Aramani, who was good at weaving webs, broke away from Hades' control the moment her self-consciousness returned. She realized that she couldn't rush out of the underworld in a hurry, so she directly activated her innate ability to weave a small world and hid in it. Rebellions occurred one after another. The stronger the creature, the more tenacious its will was. As long as they were given a chance, they could erupt with shocking power. Hades hadn't encountered such a thing for hundreds of millions of years, so he was suddenly caught off guard. He controlled death, so it was said that no one could defeat him in the underworld. This was limited by the rules. Thea naturally couldn't defeat him in the underworld, but there were always exceptions. The brave couldn't defeat the Demon King, but they could seal him. Thea did not need to defeat Hades. She only needed to release a little bit of the free will of the living beings, and she would be able to turn the underworld upside down. In particular, Hades had a hobby of collecting. He had collected many corpses of strong masters from ancient to modern times and awakened them in the underworld to serve him. These people were not much weaker than him when they were alive, and some were even stronger than him. For example, the corpse that he used as a throne was none other than Kronos, the father of Zeus, Hades, and Boston. He was the son of Gaia, the second king of the gods in the Greek pantheon, until he was overthrown by Zeus. He was the well-deserved leader of the pantheon. The sword of victory, an oath, had also awakened his own will. In addition, Thea had killed Hades' clone, so the ancient god king finally woke up from the chaos. The loneliness of hundreds of millions of years made him lose track of where he was. As the son of Gaia, the mother goddess of the earth, he was not an evil creature that was born from a mixture of the will of the giants. Kronos' ability to control the earth was genuine. The god king did not care whether the underworld was considered earth or not. He directly began to absorb energy from the earth to replenish his dried-up body. Thea really didn't recognize who this giant was. It was just a throne, and she could barely make out the shape of a human. How would she know who this giant was? Not to mention her. Even Diana might not know who this giant was. Juniors, like them, were a little far from the second-generation God King. However, even if she didn't know who this giant was, as his daughter, Hera did. That's right, Hera was also his daughter. The relationships in the Greek pantheon were so messy. The skinny man in front of her was her father. Oh my God! Let's run. The noblewoman, who had always valued her elegance over warmth and would never run if she could walk, finally panicked. She pulled Thea and was about to run. In fact, Kronos was not a good person. He was worried that his children would overthrow him, so he swallowed them all into his stomach after they were born. It was not until Zeus showed his might and overthrew him that his siblings were rescued. This tragic memory was not good for Hera. She did not want to stay here for another minute. Thea took a candle from Hades's head. She was deep in thought. Since his head was already chopped off, she could take a few more candles. Hades would not mind, right? She flicked her wrist and put 7 or 8 candles into her bag. As soon as the candle was in her hand, she received a message. Zeus was right. This thing could indeed help her return to her original time and space. She just needed a quiet place to recite a prayer praising Hades. Hey, do you know what this prayer is? She had just chopped off the enemy's head and turned around to praise him. She did not feel any pressure at all. However, Hera was not so thick-skinned. She looked at Thea. Strangely, there is no need for a prayer. With the help of the candle, I can directly return to my Mount Olympus. She was afraid that Thea would think too much. After that, you can go back on your own. Mount Olympus, so be it. It was better than the current environment. Countless dead souls rushed toward the two. Hades returned again, and his bloody face covered the sky again. At this time, he was so angry that he could not speak. He also knew the characteristics of his candle. He began to control the low-intelligence corpses to attack the two, not giving them a chance to breathe. At the same time, he began to spend effort to suppress the self-consciousness of the strong. If the number was small, he might have succeeded. After all, he was still in control of the death priesthood. Unfortunately, there were too many enemies for him to control. Let's not talk about the others. Let's talk about the second-generation king of gods, Kronos. This king of gods was endlessly absorbing power from the underworld. His hatred for Hades was the deepest, and his resistance was the most intense. Even though his own consciousness had not recovered even 1%, his powerful divine power had already begun to surge in the underworld, forcing Hades to divert more than 30% of his strength to suppress him. Hades was struggling to hold on. Thea and Hera cooperated well at this time. The two of them fought their way out. This was the advantage of practicing both magic and martial arts. When she cooperated with Diana, she could act as a mage. When she was with Hera, she could act as a warrior. She used magic to form a thin film around her body to block the splashing blood. The sword of victory and pledge could purify these ordinary corpses. As for whether they would be reincarnated or rest forever after the purification, she did not care. At first, the controlled corpses attacked them desperately. Gradually, the situation changed. Many conscious corpses crowded around the two of them and spontaneously separated them from the corpses outside. For example, the Death Knight in front of Thea did not ride a horse. Instead, he pulled the reins and trotted along with them, talking nonstop. "Quick, my consciousness can't hold on. Kill me quickly." The Death Knight stretched his neck and said, Chapter 494. No, save me first. I don't want to stay in this dark place anymore. Let me rest in peace." On the other side, a tribal warrior with a face painted like a ghost swung a spear in his hand and forced back the approaching corpses. Seeing that they had spontaneously formed a circle to isolate all the enemies, Thea was surprised. "What's the point of running? Let's just light the candle and retreat." Holding back Hera, who was throwing lightning and fireballs everywhere, the God Queen's reaction was slow, but she was no fool. She immediately understood what Hera meant. Thea tossed her a candle and stared at Hera's every move without blinking. How is this thing going to Olympus? Hera carefully held the candle and closed her eyes to sense it. Her moral values were much higher than what Thea had estimated. She reached out to grab Thea and shouted, "Let's go!" The small space around them began to compress. Obscure energy flashed, and the two were sucked into the space tunnel. The knights and warriors around them who were waiting for their death were stunned at first, but facts spoke louder than words. There were many who understood. Immediately, a warrior jumped into the tunnel. The rest, whether or not they understood what this meant, followed closely behind. Anyway, the situation was already so bad that it couldn't get any worse. Even some of the monsters in the distance who had regained their consciousness saw what was happening here. The half-human, half-spider Aramani, who was hiding in another dimension, shot out countless spiderwebs from her body and caught 7 or 8 Death Knights who were jumping into the vortex. Using the momentum of the Death Knights, she pulled herself in as well. The remaining monsters were either far away or did not have such means. The moment the vortex was about to close, a Kamala with a lion's head, a goat's body, and a snake's tail crazily rushed in. Pluto's candle didn't waver at all. It opened and came out. Before Sia could react, she was already in a place filled with stars. A towering mountain stood not far away, and waves of divine power attacked her soul. Thea didn't have time to lament. Her supervision allowed her to see a lot of things. At least she knew that she and Hera weren't the only ones who were teleporting. There were a lot of people who were hitching a ride behind them. Hera, who always reacted half a beat too slow, was dragged away. A large group of people fell out of the tunnel. There were knights in black armor, tribal warriors with messy drawings on their faces, and Aramani and the Kamala beast who fell out of the tunnel. "I'm alive. Haha, I can feel the wind again." The undead were all overjoyed. This ending was better than the eternal sleep they had expected. After all, it was better to live than to die. Many people took off their pitch-black armor. Their bodies, which were covered in rotting flesh, regained their vigor. Their strong and powerful hearts began to beat again. By chance, they had crossed the gate of life and death, found a loophole, and returned to the kingdom of the living. In the past, Mount Olympus had been a desolate place, but now it was filled with unprecedented cheers. How dare you be so presumptuous?" Hera was annoyed. This was Mount Olympus. Zeus was not at home all year round. This was his territory. How could he allow some barbarians to roar here? Just as she was about to scold them, Thea stopped her and whispered, "Your Majesty, listen to me." Hera couldn't ignore Thea's opinion now. She was frightened by the power of the holy sword. She didn't expect that the ultimate weapon of the Celtic gods was still alive. Besides, they had fought together, and there was no conflict of principles. She wanted to hear what Thea had to say, but Thea didn't talk about the resurrected people in front of her. Instead, she talked about a more fundamental problem. "Actually, I think you can inherit the position of the king of gods." "Are you crazy?" "Of course not. You are the closest person to Zeus. Why can't you inherit the position of the king of gods? Why do you have to give it to Apollo and the others?" Thea had been thinking about the so-called king of gods position. It was a big trap dug by Zeus. It was more vicious than the ancient Two peaches kill three warriors. In the original space-time, Diana was alone. She thought of a way, which was to expand the scale of the war and pull the Ocean Emperor and Pluto into the whirlpool, trying to fish in troubled waters. Her bait was Hera. Diana looked righteous, but she was actually quite black-bellied. When she was scheming, there was no need to go through so much trouble now. Poseidon didn't know, but Hades had offended him. In order to prevent revenge from him, Thea thought of a way to establish Hera. On the one hand, she could resist the huge trap of the king of God's throne. After that, Apollo and the firstborn would be Hera's business. Even if Zeus found out later, he wouldn't have any objections. On the other hand, if Hera inherited the throne, she would definitely need supporters. As long as Hippolyte was a political figure, she would definitely sacrifice part of her dignity to ease the fundamental conflict between the two sides. The enchantment of Paradise Island was destroyed. Now that the location of the island was exposed to the world, it was not a good thing. Hera had prestige, and Hippolyte had manpower. Both sides had the foundation to cooperate. Hera looked at Thea, stunned. Only men can be the king of gods. I have never thought of going beyond that. Your words are too scary. That's all in the past. Now, men and women are equal. Do you think the position of the king of gods is an obstacle to you? Thea felt that there was hope and continued to persuade her. What obstacle? There was no obstacle at all. It was the chair that Hera had been looking at for tens of thousands of years. Apollo and the firstborn had the problem of fighting their way to Mount Olympus, but Hera didn't have this problem at all. This was her home. Ambition existed in the heart of any intelligent life. Hera just didn't think that before. She had been holding the throne of the Queen of Gods for tens of thousands of years. She really didn't think that there was hope for her to be the king of gods. All kinds of thoughts collided in her mind. What about the position of the Queen of Gods? Thea looked at him with a puzzled look. Zeus, you are just missing, not dead. Your marriage still exists. Hera was thunderstruck. How could this logical relationship be calculated? I am the king of gods, and Zeus is the queen of gods? Can't I? Is there a rule in the pantheon against this? Thea asked. In terms of rules, there was no such rule in the pantheon. Not to mention the Greek pantheon, even the Egyptian pantheon and the Celtic pantheon didn't have such a ridiculous rule. As long as you are the king of gods, you can set rules to restrict Zeus from going out and even issue an oracle to forbid him from leaving Mount Olympus. Thea didn't care where Zeus was now or whether Hera could control him in the future. She came up with a lot of ideas. Chapter 4, 95. The more Hera listened, the brighter her eyes became. If she didn't have to put on the airs of a god queen, she would have pounded her fist on her palm and exclaimed that it made sense. She didn't think so at first, but after listening to Thea's analysis and her own little ambition, Hera suddenly realized that this empty throne of the god of gods might be her only choice to win back her husband's prestige. You're really intelligent, perhaps not inferior to Athena. What's your name? Hera asked seriously. In modern society, it was normal to say one's name first before chatting. However, after interacting with these gods for a long time, Thea also understood some inside information. The lives of mortals were too short, and even demigods could only live a little longer in front of the immortal gods. It wasn't worth their time to remember their names. Leaving one's name proved that it was a special mark in the immortal life of the other party, according to the inherent concept of the gods. This was a big deal for them. The young lady stood up straight and reported her name in accordance with the Greek etiquette. Thea Quinn. Hera nodded silently. Her intelligence was not low either, or it could be said that the gods had lived for so many years and there were not many idiots. Connecting the dots, Hera could guess that Sia wanted her to be Hades's shield. After all, The era of Kronos had passed. No matter how glorious he was in life, he was already dead. Hades only needed to spend some time to calm the turmoil in the underworld. With Hades' vengeful nature, his next step would definitely not be to apologize. However, Hera wasn't afraid of the underworld king, especially since he treated her like a spoil of war. If she could teach this brother of hers a lesson, the god empress didn't mind being used by Sia a little. Since they were going to fight against Hades, then these guys who had come back from the dead were his loyal minions. Only Mount Olympus and the god of gods would protect them, even after death. Hera knew that she couldn't take back the step she had taken. Thea didn't continue to interrupt, but waited for her to strengthen her confidence. Finally, Hera walked out and stood in front of the cheering crowd. She exuded the dignified aura of a god empress, and the crowd slowly quieted down. What happened next was nothing to write home about. The people who escaped were the elites of their respective eras, and they all had brains. Realizing that Hades would launch a crazy revenge, they immediately hugged Hera's thigh and expressed their willingness to live and die with Mount Olympus. She had hired thugs, but most of them were big and burly, which didn't fit Hera's taste. Furthermore, she wanted all the gods to attend the ceremony. She needed some support to become the divine king, and these fellows were a little unpresentable. At the critical moment, Thea jumped out to help him solve the problem, which was the so-called subjugation of the Amazons. "Oh, you spent so much time and effort just for this." Hera dragged out her words. She finally understood Sia's real purpose for scheming for her. Thea just smiled and didn't explain further. "Okay, as long as the Amazons surrender to me, I'll accept it." It wasn't that Hera was magnanimous, but that Zeus had too many mistresses. If the god empress was angry at them one by one, she would have died of anger. Hera's original purpose was to beat up whoever she saw, and the result of her attack could be summed up with a laugh. It wasn't a big deal to spare Hippolyte among the 180 mistresses. Hera thought clearly that as long as Hippolyte surrendered to her and let her vent her anger, she would let it go. Thea was also worried about the difference in the flow of time between the two worlds. On the one hand, she was afraid that Diana would be worried. On the other hand, it would cause a lot of trouble if Paradise Island was exposed to the world. She asked for the coordinates of the so-called human world and hurriedly said goodbye to Hera and rushed back to Paradise Island. As for the culprit, Hermes, the two didn't mention anything. Next time, no matter who he was, she would kill him without any nonsense. A white light flashed, and Thea looked around. She was back on Paradise Island. The anti-magic area on the island disappeared, making it much easier for her to find people. She hurriedly saw Diana and quickly flew over. "Thea, you're fine." Diana sensed her as soon as she arrived. The two girls hugged each other passionately. Diana checked her body from head to toe before she was relieved. "Where's that bad woman, Hera?" Diana said angrily. Thea smiled bitterly and avoided the topic of bad woman. "How long have I disappeared? Where are Hermes and Apollo? What's the situation outside? Where's Queen Hippolyte?" "You've disappeared for about 10 minutes. The enemies have all run away, but Eris was still there. I don't have any way to contact the outside world. What's going on outside?" Thea had to admit that Diana's way of thinking was not adjusted to a normal person's channel. The existence of Paradise Island was already known to the outside world, but she didn't even realize such a serious problem. Without hesitation, she activated her eternal night, the chosen of the moon goddess. This time, she needed it to block the view, especially the detection of the satellites of various countries. "Quick, let's go see the queen." Thea did not have time to explain. She pulled Diana's hand and went to see Hippolyte. They spent some time healing Hippolyte. When the queen regained consciousness, Thea told her about the current situation on Paradise Island and the solution she discussed with Hera. The development of the matter was exactly as she had predicted. The moral values of political figures were frighteningly low. Hippolyte had no problem bowing to Hera and agreed very quickly. "We have to bow to Hera." Diana was a little dissatisfied. However, both Hippolyte and Sia thought that it was a good idea. This was equivalent to the Amazons returning to the family of Greek gods. Under this premise, no matter how big her opinion was, it was useless. The valiant goddess of war could only pout to express her dissatisfaction. "You don't have to heal me. Just teleport me over now. I'll admit defeat and apologize." Hippolyte thought deeper. For the sake of Hera, she put herself in a very low position. If she admitted defeat with a weak body, Hera would be more satisfied, right? Thea also expressed her support for her resolution and directly teleported Hippolyte to Mount Olympus. She did not know what the two women talked about. Thea began to build a portal between the two worlds. With thousands of Amazon warriors, the requirements for the portal were not low. The temporary portal was not stable. Under the shroud of the eternal night, the recovery ability of all the female warriors began to increase. Many of them slowly woke up: Diana, Antiope, and the Supergirl who chased after Apollo to no avail began to help treat the wounded. Not long after, Hippolyte came back in high spirits. It could be seen that she had made Hera very happy. Not only did the God Empress heal her injuries, but she also brought back one of the 3 leaves from the giant tree that was said to have borne the golden apple. This leaf could heal all the Amazons. Chapter 496. Thea was envious as she watched the Amazons soak the leaves in the spring water. Each of them only needed to drink a mouthful to heal themselves. Hera had accumulated a lot of wealth over the years. She could remove a leg from the table or scrape a handful of ashes from the stove and use them as magical tools. She could make a few divine artifacts by simply dismantling something. From this point of view, Hades and Poseidon were not just after Hera's reputation. Mount Olympus was really rich. If Zeus's treasure vault was included, it would be even richer. Seeing that Hera had healed the Amazon sisters, Diana finally had a good impression of this god empress. "Listen to me, my sisters. It's time for the enchantment of Paradise Island to disappear. I've received Hera's forgiveness. She has allowed us to enter Mount Olympus. Everyone, go back and pack your things. We'll depart immediately." Hippolyte ordered loudly. Thea originally thought that she would give a long speech, but nothing happened. This was the advantage of military management. The leader did not need to explain, and the subordinates did not waste time talking nonsense. At most, they would just say, "Oh," and do as they were told. Everyone quickly went back to pack their things. Are we really going to give up this island? Hippolyte saw that Thea was busy building the teleportation magic circle. She was a little reluctant to give up Paradise Island, which she had lived on for thousands of years. She sent Diana to ask this question. Thea could only answer honestly to her lover's question. "Let's send them away first." As for this island, Diana looked at her expectantly. Thea stopped what she was doing. "We can't go to war with the human government for this island, right?" Diana nodded. She would not rush into the White House with the Vulcan's sword just to leave some memories. She could not do that. Secondly, the world's borders have been fixed. If a large island suddenly appears in the Mediterranean Sea, what will the European countries do? What if the United States wants to build a military base here? What if Russia also wants to get involved? What will the result be? The result should be war, Thea said solemnly. Diana's expression was a little ugly. None of this was complicated. She was not the girl who had left the island back then. 100 years had taught her a lot of things. If a war happened because of her, she would regret it to death. Is there no other way? In order to avoid conflict between humans, I'll ask the Sea King and his wife for help. I think that sinking to the bottom of the sea is the only way. Thea thought of something as she spoke, but in order to tease Diana, she pretended to be helpless. In the end, the war god gritted her teeth and said, "Then let's sink to the bottom of the sea." Sia felt that it was enough and continued, "Magic definitely won't work. Not to mention me. Even the ancient archmages wouldn't be able to move such a large island without the help of hundreds of official mages and months of effort. Not to mention, there's also the problem of crossplane movement. As for the gods in their heyday, perhaps 5 or 6 of the 12 main gods, excluding the King of Gods, would be able to do it. But in today's era, you must have thought of a way, right?" At first, Diana thought that she was explaining the situation, but after listening for a while, she realized that something was wrong. She suddenly realized that her lover had a way to solve this problem that even the gods couldn't. If magic can't solve a problem, we still have science. Thea raised a finger and said proudly, "I'll agree to any condition you have. Hurry up and tell me." Diana looked around and realized that no one was paying attention to her. She whispered slang that only the two of them could understand. "Atomize. Can't we just shrink the entire island?" Back then, the metropolis could be shrunk into a glass cover. Of course, Paradise Island can be shrunk too. When the time comes, you can put it wherever you want. Thea revealed the answer frankly. Diana's beautiful red lips were wide open, and her bright red tongue was faintly visible. She made a sound of "ah" from her mouth. She really didn't expect that the problem would be solved so easily. The answer was so simple that she wanted to beat Theo up. If it was so easy, why did she bring up the Sea King, the great wizard, and the gods? "If you have an easy way, you should have told me earlier." Diana stared at her with a fierce face, and Thea laughed. Needless to say, Diana was in a different mood at this time. If it weren't for the wrong time, she would have done something to her. She suppressed the evil thoughts in her heart and continued to set up the teleportation circle. Atomization could shrink a person, but no one knew if this scientific method would cause other changes during the teleportation process. Thea would not rashly gamble with a person's life. If the person was guaranteed to be fine, then everything else would be easy to deal with. Diana told Hippolyte the result. When she suddenly heard that the technology in the outside world had developed to this extent, the queen was really shocked. She didn't know that this was a kind of black technology. She thought that it was a common technology, and this made her even more determined to go to Olympus. Earth was too dangerous. Although the black fog shrouded the whole island and blocked the detection of satellites, it was hard to say whether it was a good or bad action. The nearby countries discovered the black fog and began to send ships to search. Hippolyte was not to be trifled with. She took out 3 or 4 magic props to help buy time. Some summoned dolphins, some conjured sirens, and several search ships were led astray without knowing it. Half an hour later, the permanent portal across the 2 worlds was completed. It was still very rough, but there was no problem to send the strong Amazons. Many Amazons stepped through the portal with big and small bags and rushed to their new home. "Big Sister Sia, can I also go and take a look?" Supergirl, who had helped a lot, asked in a fawning manner. Could Kara go to Olympus? Thea was not sure, but she could help ask. When Hera got the news, she was watching the replay of the magic mirror. The replay showed several scenes where Supergirl beat Apollo until he vomited blood and fled. During the battle, she and Thea were fighting magic and didn't pay much attention to Apollo's battle. It was really tragic. In Hera's distant memory, the last person who hurt Apollo was Ra, the king of the Egyptian gods. Now that he was going to inherit the throne, He was naturally in a competitive relationship with the ambitious Apollo. When Hera heard that Thea said that Supergirl wanted to visit, Hera agreed without hesitation. As the crowd came and went, Thea also joined the ranks of the outsiders to stop the search. For a great magician like her, it really didn't take much effort to stop some ordinary people. She could find the target with her supervision and cast a long-distance spell to solve the problem. During the break, she didn't stay idle. Atomization still needed to be arranged and even calculated. The sudden disappearance of the island would definitely have some impact on the surrounding coastline. Thea contacted Mira, who was good at controlling water. Chapter 497. The Neptune couple owed her and Diana a lot of favors. When they heard that she needed their help, the two came quickly. Crete will be affected the most, followed by the ports of Egypt and Cyprus. This is where I need your help. Thea showed them the results of her calculations. Paradise Island was a magic island, and it would often swim slowly in the nearby sea. If it suddenly disappeared, the surrounding coastal areas would definitely be affected. When they heard that it was just to smooth the sea, both of them said that it was easy. Whether it was the Neptune's, Trident, or Mira's water control, they could do it easily. When all the Amazons withdrew, Thea began to arrange the atomization equipment. Brainiac's device was too advanced. Even she could not understand the principle, let alone the scientists on Earth. However, Thea was not a pure scientist. She did not want to get to the bottom of it. She directly scanned the image and made a device similar to a ray gun. The specific composition of the ray particles was not easy to estimate. She still used the technology of the Atom Man Thea, directly arranged 5 ray points over the island. When Hippolyte and Antiope left the island and entered Mount Olympus, she and Diana rose into the air and signaled the Neptune couple to get ready. Thea began to control the atomization equipment to operate at low power. Seeing the island slowly shrinking, Diana, who saw the black technology for the first time, was amazed. It was not easy for the gods to do this. After receiving the news that the Neptune couple's seawater was stable, Thea began to increase the power of the ray. 5 minutes later, the whole Paradise Island was reduced to the size of a birthday cake, and Diana was given to her. Thea did not care where she put it. If she wanted to add some fun, she could even put it in the bedroom. Thea put away the atomization equipment, thanked the Neptune couple, and left the scene with Diana. Thea could tell that Diana didn't want to place Paradise Island in Hera's territory, so she didn't force it. She could slowly set up a large magic barrier in the future and put it back in its original position. Magic could also do this. It was just a matter of time and effort. After returning to his own extraterrestrial supervision committee, he sent out a lot of people to investigate the so-called Eastern Mediterranean fog incident. After a quick appearance, he dragged Diana to Mount Olympus. The big show was about to begin. It would be a pity if he didn't go and watch. What did you do? Why do I feel like the urgency in my heart has disappeared? Diana asked. It was her first time coming to Mount Olympus. She felt a sense of calmness that she hadn't felt in a long time. That's right. Thea felt that it was mostly due to Hera's bravery in shouldering the heavy burden and shouldering a lot of Diana's problems. Wonder Woman went from being the key protagonist to a dispensable side character in the following events. As a demigod, she would definitely have some inexplicable premonitions. Haha, isn't this a good thing? Let's go and see Hera first. She's actually not a bad person. Submitting to the god, Queen, wasn't a difficult thing to say. Diana, who was also a member of the gods, naturally wouldn't be so immature as to get mad at Hera. Although the two didn't meet intimately, they didn't fight either. Mount Olympus, which had been quiet for thousands of years, was very lively today. Hera now had people saluting her wherever she went, which made her feel very happy. According to the Japanese manga, She also found a sense of being recognized. Seeing Diana lowering her head, Hera, who had a big family and business, thought that her armor was too monotonous and a little imperfect. She gave her a red cloak with gold edges, which was a very obvious sign of goodwill. As Thea, who had helped her a lot, Hera naturally wasn't stingy. Seeing that she didn't have a suitable armor, Hera directly opened Zeus's treasury and took out an armor called God's Armor. Looking at the silver-white half-body armor with a blue lining, golden hair, green eyes, and the sword of victory and pledge, Thea felt that she might have taken the wrong script and mixed in some strange things. But it would be a waste if she didn't take it, so she didn't refuse. The two found an empty room to try out the new equipment. Diana's cloak only had some protection against arrows, fire, cold, and acid. With her current strength, the cloak was more for aesthetic purposes. Wearing only armor every day was a little monotonous, especially after knowing Superman, Batman, and the other cloaks. The armor that Hera gave Thea was amazing. It wasn't the same as Toria's, but was made by Zeus himself when he had nothing better to do. In order to deceive girls from all walks of life, Zeus could be said to be proficient in all professions and the kind of top-notch master who had mastered all sub-professions. Casting armor was even easier. Although the defensive ability was amazing, Thea felt that this set of armor was more like a robe than an armor. It could greatly enhance the user's ability to control lightning, provided that they had to have it. Thea didn't have any problem with this. In the past, she needed to mix the energy in her body. Now, as long as different magic was injected into the armor, it would automatically form lightning magic. It was immune to lightning and had a very high resistance to fire, cold, and acid. It also had a certain enhancement in speed. Thea and Diana tried it nearby. The two women's speed was already equal, and Thea was even a little faster. At the same time, it had a significant increase in strength and endurance. The most important thing was that this was a woman's armor with a battle skirt. After so many years in this world, they had seen many artifacts. However, there really weren't many armors, and women's armors were even rarer than Kryptonians. Diana's armor was custom-made, and it was very difficult to find another one. After testing the enhancement of various attributes, Thea's strength finally caught up with Diana's under the enhancement of the armor. She could barely be considered an advanced pseudo-demigod. After confirming the flow of time between the two worlds, they learned that Hera was going to hold a gathering of the gods in 10 days. She would announce her succession to the throne at the banquet. Thea naturally had no objections. She pulled Supergirl, who was having a crazy time, and the three returned to Earth after sending Supergirl back to school. And returning in 10 days, Thea began to learn from each other with Diana. In order to keep Paradise Island, Diana had agreed to all of her requests. After some reluctance, she unlocked quite a few postures. The two of them felt as if a huge burden had been lifted off their shoulders, and they lived happily for a few days. As for Zola, who had been kidnapped by Hermes, Diana just thought about it and put her aside. She would take care of it, but Hermes was nowhere to be found. She couldn't do anything about it, even if she wanted to. Diana, who had been with Thea for many years, was much more realistic compared to the original space-time. She only knew Zola, and they weren't even friends. Diana couldn't go all out to find Zola for her. Chapter 498. Although 10 days were short, Thea still took some time to do something big. She gathered a few capable people in the Bat Cave for a meeting. Thea, Diana, Superman, the Martian Manhunter, and Batman. Now, this loose circle was starting to resemble the Justice League. Let's call it version 0. One of the League. I've called you all here for one thing. Thea went straight to the point. Considering the pressure and danger in the real world, I'm going to strengthen Louise Lane. Her earth-shattering words almost made Superman, who was drinking water beside her, bite his tongue. Why are you doing this? Batman, who had investigated Superman's 8 generations of ancestors, naturally knew Louise. He just wanted to know why Thea did this. Was there a need to say it? Louise Lane's death directly triggered the plot of the League of Injustice's God on Earth. Her influence on Superman was too great. At first, Thea didn't take it seriously, but on Mount Olympus, she finally realized that treasures that could resurrect the dead were extremely rare. Even Hera only had 1 or 2. Considering their bad relationship with Hades, it would be very troublesome if they died now. Only God knew how the Owl Court had managed to save Yao Fei. Over the years, they had conducted hundreds of experiments according to the procedure on that day. Unfortunately, none of them succeeded. What's more, without the pool of Lazarus, it would be difficult for Yao Fei to wake up even if he became a vegetable. But Louise Lane was a suicidal person. She appeared in all kinds of dangerous places without any protection. One day, she might die if God didn't pay attention. That was why Thea proposed today. You ask me why? Thea faced Batman's question. She didn't care that Superman was beside her. She pointed at Superman. I'm worried about him. If Louise dies, his bottom line may not be able to stop him. What should we do then? Are we really going to use kryptonite against a noble friend? Batman pulled a long face and didn't say anything. In fact, that was what he was thinking. It was just that there was no need to say it out loud. Superman was also dejected. He didn't know what he would do if it really happened. How are you going to strengthen her? The Martian hunter naturally knew Louise Lane, but he didn't want to get involved when it came to Superman. There are only a few types of strengthening: genes, magic, and equipment. Actually, you misunderstood. I just want Louise to have the ability to protect herself. I don't want her to be a superhero. What a joke. Wouldn't it be more dangerous for Louise to become a hero? If she had the ability, she would have gone to interview Darkseid instead. Although it involves me, I support it. Superman didn't know what choice he would make in the end, but it was always right to take precautions in advance. Louise is a woman filled with a sense of justice. She should be able to protect herself. Diana spoke up at the right time. With 3 votes in favor, the Martian Manhunter and Batman couldn't think of any reason to object. There was no doubt that Louise was a righteous person, and Batman, who was so paranoid that he almost became a cancer of suspicion, was also certain of this. How to strengthen her? Thea looked at Batman, who waved his hand. My martial arts aren't suitable for her. Actually, what I meant was to let Batgirl or Black Canary train her. I don't want her to be very strong, but she should at least be able to resist a few blows. Also, Thea threw a teleportation gem to Superman. I made this teleportation gem. The teleportation location is set at Supergirl's apartment. Louise's defense is too weak. I think we can gather our strength to make her a set of armor. Gathering everyone's strength to make armor. This idea naturally came from the Hellbat armor, but there was no need for Louise to fight her way to Apocalypse Star. There was no need for it to be so powerful. Superman was certain that this was a good idea, and they split up to do some work. The task of measuring the body was given to Superman to build the shell on the star. Diana did the post-production enchantment. Batman installed various electronic components, and the Martian hunter installed the anti-heart control module on the helmet. Finally, Thea atomized it to make it easier to carry around. In order to prevent this reporter from going further and further down the road of death, the 5 capable people, including Superman, all tacitly agreed not to make any weapon systems. This armor could be said to have 0 attack power, and its defense and speed were maxed out. Presumably, as long as Louise didn't have a death wish, she would still be safe. After much consideration, the training work was given to Barbara. Excluding Thea, who was an unconventional combat power, Batgirl Barbara could be said to be the role model of the younger generation of heroines. Whether it was her intelligence or her martial arts, she was outstanding. She was full of righteousness, and she must have a lot in common with Louise. After dealing with Louise, Thea and Diana rushed back to Mount Olympus. The naive Supergirl was naturally dragged along. This little girl's energy had increased by at least 30% after the battle with Apollo. Now, Thea and Diana couldn't suppress her without using their full strength. When they returned to Mount Olympus, the environment was still the same, but the atmosphere was much more lively than before. Hippolyte wisely retreated to the second line, and all the Amazons were led by Antiope. This strict female warrior was loyal to her duty and never showed favoritism, which won Hera's praise. In addition to the Amazons, Mount Olympus had another force, and that was the elites who had escaped from the underworld with Thea and Hera. Their structure was loose, but under the strong pressure of Hades, they still submitted to Hera and elected the half-human, half-spider Ahriman as their leader. With these two forces in hand, Hera constantly balanced the relationship between the two sides. The taste of power intoxicated her, and she would not give up the position of the king of gods, even if you asked her to. In addition to the three women, the first to arrive was unsurprisingly the goddess of strife, Eris. This goddess came and went without a trace. Wherever there was strife, she could be seen. Following closely behind the goddess of strife was Thea and Diana's old friend, Ares. Compared to the elegant middle-aged man during the First World War, the god of war now looked older. His face was full of age spots, and his beard reached his chest. He was also dressed in rags, but the only thing that was pleasing to the eye was that he no longer pretended to be a cripple. The old god of war looked like Hera's grandfather from afar. In fact, he was the biological son of Hera and Zeus, but the world was used to dividing good and evil according to their own understanding. As the son of the great evil and jealous Hera, Ares was also cursed a lot, and no matter what, he was all blamed on the god of war. The people who cursed him included Hippolyte and Diana. Thea sometimes maliciously thought that Diana must have said a lot of bad things about Ares behind his back before she became a martial artist. Chapter 499. Not long after, the severely injured Apollo also arrived at the scene. The sun god saw the Supergirl at a glance and shrank his neck, not daring to explode. He found a place to sit down. Not long after he sat down, the fire god Hephaestus, the god of wine Dionysus, and the goddess of agriculture Demeter arrived one after another. The god of wine looked normal, and his appearance was a slightly handsome young man. The fire god's appearance surprised Thea. The artistic style, blurred eyes, and defined muscles that she imagined were all absent. This Vulcan looked short and stout, almost like a chimney. His skin was very rough, like a severely burned patient. His skin was red with a tinge of black, and his mouth was full of big fangs. He could play the role of a monster in Journey to the West if he changed his clothes slightly. The remaining goddess of agriculture looked like a treant. Her skin was dry and withered, and she looked old and tired. Hermes, who was secretly in cahoots with her, did not come, which made Thea a little regretful. She did not know where the god of speed in Thebes had gone. Whether it was using her supervision or Croydon's compass, she could not find any trace of him. The moon goddess Artemis was still sleeping in her god's kingdom. With Thea's help, her power of faith was much more abundant than in the original time and space, so there was no need for her to come out. The god of strength, Hercules, had always been at odds with the Olympian gods, and Hera did not know that he was still alive, so she did not invite him. As the first gathering after the twilight of the gods, the sun god Apollo, the god of war Ares, the goddess of strife Eris, the goddess of agriculture Demeter, the fire god Hephaestus, the god of wine Dionysus, and Hera. There were a total of 7 gods with different motives. Thea pulled Diana and watched from afar. She was full of malice, waiting to watch a good show. When Hera was about to inherit the throne of the god of gods, the expressions of these gods would be very interesting. As for going up and asking for a seat among the gods, she was not so ambitious. It was not easy to get herself and Diana out of the picture. Jumping in again. Wouldn't that be crazy? Standing for a while would not kill anyone. Hera didn't disappoint her. After chatting with the gods for a while, they finally got to the main topic of the day. Zeus has been missing for a long time. The majesty of the Greek gods cannot be ignored. As your mother and queen, I have the responsibility to shoulder this burden at the critical moment. Hera paused to observe the gods' reactions. After living for such a long time, the gods were no fools. As the nominal mother, Hera's words were a little strange, but they couldn't figure out what was strange about it. Apollo, who had been thinking about how to kill the Supergirl, turned his attention to Hera. The sun god didn't know what Hera meant by saying those words. Feeling that she had never attracted so much attention before, Hera solemnly said an earth-shattering sentence. I want to inherit the throne of the divine king. What? Did I hear it wrong? Apollo's head mechanically looked at the god of wine, who was sitting on his left, and found that he also had a dull expression. Apollo then looked at the goddess of strife on his right. Eris, who used to laugh and scold the gods, was staring at Hera in a daze. Apollo finally realized something and flipped the table in front of him. Nonsense! The throne can only belong to me, and only to me. Apollo, who was so angry that he almost forgot his surname, was not bragging. Divine power surged all over his body, in all directions. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose emitted scorching flames at the same time. It was obvious that he was furious. Hera was a little scared. If not for the firstborn, Apollo's combat power was definitely the strongest among the gods. Fortunately, the queen now had a way to restrain him. She waved behind her. Thea quickly pushed the Supergirl, who was watching the show attentively, out. Hera gave this girl a divine bracelet that could store the energy of the sun, so she should at least show some appreciation. Why was she watching the show? Supergirl wasn't stupid either. She quickly reacted and stood in front of Hera with her indescribable object, preparing to continue absorbing the energy of the human-shaped yellow sun. Apollo saw her interfering, and his heart went cold. At this time, he still didn't know about the existence of the Kryptonians. He only felt that the woman in the red cloak was completely out of his control. No matter how the sun god thought, he couldn't think of a countermeasure. Huff! Apollo breathed heavily, forcibly suppressing the anger in his heart. He wanted to leave in a huff, but he also wanted to see if there was anything he didn't know about Hera's ascension to the throne of the divine king. His body felt as if it was pressed down by a heavy weight, and he slowly sat back down. Who is in favor of me inheriting the throne of the divine king? Who is against it? Hera was very happy to see that Apollo was defeated and asked loudly for the opinions of the gods. The rest of the children were a little bit shocked. Even Vulcan, who had always paid attention to forging and was indifferent to everything else, was a little dumbfounded. His mouth was full of sharp teeth, so big that a football could be stuffed in. Diana was also a little shocked. Thea told her the whole story, of course, without the various versions of Zeus and Athena's schemes. Diana, who had always been committed to the equality of men and women, immediately accepted this explanation, who said that the divine king must be a man. It was also possible for the divine king to be the divine king. Then what did you do to Zeus? Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, asked. She was also a descendant of Kronos, and was the sister of Hera, Zeus, and Hades. She was considered an elder among the gods. Unlike Thea's suggestion, Hera didn't change into a queen and then a king, which was too scary. She chose a safe way to deal with it, which was to play Tai Chi with Demeter. Her words were ambiguous, and after a long time, she didn't say a word of truth. The rest of the gods didn't say anything. What else could they say? Hera wasn't alone at the scene. If the soft approach didn't work, then the hard approach. Hera now had at least 1,000 followers on Mount Olympus. Her few gods had a high level of life, but in terms of combat power, they couldn't be compared to 1,000, except for the sun god and the old god of war, whose combat power was super strong. The rest of the gods didn't have a strong clergy. Blacksmiths, brewers, and farmers, no matter how you looked at it, they couldn't beat Hera and her followers. They all bowed their heads and didn't say a word, pretending to be cowards. Hera was overjoyed. She immediately walked slowly to the high platform under everyone's gaze, which represented the supreme throne of the divine king, as if waiting for the birth of a new lord. Hera didn't know if she could be accepted, but the situation didn't allow her to choose. She turned her back, lifted her peacock feather coat, and sat down steadily. The resistance she imagined didn't happen, but the throne didn't welcome her either. What was going on? Just as Hera was feeling suspicious, some changes happened. Her crown was replaced by a crown, and her empty hands had a scepter that symbolized power. The silent sky seemed to be playing some kind of music to celebrate the birth of the new king of Olympus. Chapter 500. After a few similar sounds, the sky became completely silent. Apart from that, there was nothing else. Why was it so quiet? The gods and Hera had all seen the power of Zeus. It was really the same color as heaven and earth, and the sun and the moon competed for glory. Why was the reaction of heaven and earth so faint when Hera inherited the throne? Were you going to admit it? The movement was too small, and it was a little fake. Were you going to deny it? The crown and scepter were given to Hera, and heaven and earth even celebrated a little symbolically. This kind of result made the gods a little confused. Only Thea knew that Zeus was still alive. Now, Mount Olympus probably only recognized Hera as a substitute. It was equivalent to the position of the crown prince in the past. She definitely had the power, but it was still a little far from the official succession. No matter what, Hera had inherited the throne. No matter how dissatisfied Apollo was, he was in no position to speak. The sun god slammed the door and left angrily. The rest of the gods more or less had some expectations of the god king, but now they were all like frosted eggplants, and they left with gloomy expressions. Even the goddess of strife, Eris, who was usually full of herself, could not figure out what had happened in such a short time. But there was one thing she was sure of. The throne of the god king was settled, and the disputes of the gods were forcibly suppressed. As the goddess of strife, the foundation of her existence disappeared. Eris walked out with light steps as if she had encountered a disaster, and her expression was blank. Thea also took Diana and Supergirl to bid farewell to the high-spirited Hera. Hermes has surrendered to the underworld, but Hades's trouble still exists. You have to be careful. Before leaving, Hera kindly reminded them. As the person who had the best relationship with her, Thea expressed gratitude to the new God King on behalf of the others. She was not very worried about Hades. These gods in Mount Olympus and the underworld were indeed immortal. However, they could be killed as soon as they entered the so-called human world. Hera's words meant that she couldn't stay out of it. If Hades was in trouble, she had to come and help. Thea felt that Hades might not even know who she was. At most, he would use the holy sword as a clue and secretly hate the Celtic gods. Now that everyone was dead in their own god's kingdom, it would be extremely difficult to go to each other's home to cause trouble. With Hades's forbearing character, he would not carry out any thunderous actions. The priesthood of Pluto determined that no one could escape death. so he was not in a hurry at all. No matter who offended him, they would fall into his hands one day. He had followed this core idea for tens of thousands of years, and he would not make an exception for Thea. The young mistress was very relieved as she brought Diana and Supergirl back to Earth. After bidding farewell to Supergirl, who had gone back to school, she went home with Diana to unlock new positions. No one knew how long it would take for Zola and the Zeus Smuff in her stomach to be born. This had nothing to do with Thea. As for the firstborn, it was even more troublesome for Hera. If the firstborn had any brains, he would not challenge Hera, who had all the advantages. Therefore, in short, this low-level version of the Battle of the Gods was going to end before it even started. Thea spoke on behalf of Diana. Our goal was the new god, not the broken god of war. We don't care. Everything was back on track. Those who were supposed to go to school went to school, and those who were supposed to go to work went to work. The fog in the eastern Mediterranean had become one of Earth's unsolved mysteries. Neither the Heaven's Eye Society nor Thea's committee managed to find any inside information. Their subordinates wrote the report without knowing what was going on, and their leaders signed it for the record. The matter had finally come to an end. Thea looked at the invitation in her hand and threw it back on the table. It was an invitation from the Advanced Technology Laboratory in Central City, inviting people from all walks of life to observe the official operation of the particle accelerator. As an authority in the field of genetics, the young mistress was now a big name in the scientific community. In addition, she had a good relationship with the Advanced Technology Laboratory, so Reverse Lightning, who was disguised as Dr. Harrison Wales, had also sent her an invitation. The particle accelerator is about to be activated. Thea looked at the gloomy sky outside the window. Her gaze flew out of the metropolis and saw Central City in the distance. If the metropolis was said to have turned from sunny to cloudy, then Central City was completely cloudy. If one did not know the truth, they would definitely say that Dr. Harrison Wales was crazy to conduct an experiment in such weather. The scientific community was generally not optimistic about Dr. Wales' experiment. His so-called future was about to open, changing the understanding of physics, bringing about the advancement of dynamics, and making unprecedented breakthroughs in human medicine. Most of the scientists felt that Dr. Wales was under too much pressure and that there was something wrong with his brain. What nonsense was this? There were people who mocked and ridiculed him, people who tried their best to persuade him. And naturally, there were also people who were envious and jealous. Thea learned from Gideon that Reverse Lightning was so excited that he was about to jump up and down. He had painstakingly prepared for 15 years and was about to bear fruit. He had never been so clear-headed before. If she had just arrived in this world, Thea could still go to the scene of the particle accelerator explosion and maybe get an ability or something if she was lucky. Unfortunately, Thea's level was now too high. If she was given an ability that was incompatible with the current system, she would have to go through a lot of trouble to split her soul and cut it out, which would be troublesome. It just so happened that the scientific community was boycotting this experiment, so she went with the flow and asked her assistant to call and decline the invitation. Diana wasn't interested in these scientific matters and went to work on her foundation, while Thea stayed at home alone to watch TV. Sure enough, it rained heavily that night. People from all walks of life called Dr. Wales and advised him to postpone the experiment. Reverse Lightning acted out the image of a paranoid and crazy scientist very well. A few cities away, Thea could see Reverse Lightning roaring into the phone. His expression was full of his love for science and his desire to know the truth. If there was a ranking of the acting skills of these heroes and villains, if Reverse Lightning said that he was second, no one would dare to say that they were first. The old guy's acting skills were really too good, other than Thea's supervision, who could see him through the phone. He pretended to be conflicted and mixed with all kinds of complicated emotions. When his acting skills exploded, even he himself would believe it. With this deep acting skill, even if he didn't have the power of speed, Reverse Lightning would probably be able to win an Oscar, right? The rain outside the house was getting heavier and heavier. Not only the scientists in the field of physics, the citizens and reporters outside the cutting-edge laboratory, but even the staff inside the laboratory began to persuade Dr. Wales to postpone the experiment. In such bad weather, it was too easy for accidents to happen. Reverse Lightning sneered in his heart. The sun is bright. Why would I experiment? What I want is an accident. Once again, despite the opposition of the crowd, he forcibly started the particle accelerator. Thea could see a trace of nervousness from his subtle expression. Whether he would return to the original space-time and live a good life or wait for death in the 21st century, it all depended on this trembling. In the pouring rain and waves of opposition outside, Reverse Lightning started the particle accelerator. Chapter 5:01. The huge underground facility began to operate, and a huge amount of electricity from Central City was injected into the particle accelerator. Reverse Lightning's calculations were very accurate, and there were no malfunctions in the early and middle stages. This made the people in the laboratory feel a little relieved. However, when the energy began to run wildly and the particle accelerator entered the 45th minute, the operation of the equipment reached a critical value. Several monitoring devices emitted rapid red beeps, and the people in the laboratory fell into an abyss. It was too late to stop it now. Reverse Lightning pretended to be dumbfounded, and a few young people volunteered to manually turn off the equipment at the bottom. Thea recognized the young people, Ronnie Raymond, Cisco Ramon, and Caitlin Snow. However, the huge energy of the particle accelerator interfered with her vision, and their figures were very blurry. Their noble act of self-sacrifice did not change the fact. Although they cut off the energy supply system of the particle accelerator, the accelerator, which had reached full capacity, began to shrink rapidly and completed the whole process of shrinking to a total energy explosion in 3 seconds. The orange energy soared into the sky, and the thick clouds were scattered. Countless debris were swept into the air, and the shock waves swept in all directions. The crowd outside the cutting-edge technology laboratory began to flee in all directions. No one knew what was going on, and they only felt that they had lost 2 legs. Thea was just about to look at the Central City police station to see Barry Allen, who was preparing to be struck by lightning, when she suddenly saw darkness in front of her. Something was affecting her vision. When she retracted her gaze and looked at the Central City police station again, she found that Barry Allen was lying in a pile of debris, and small lightning kept flowing under his skin. Just as she was about to take a closer look at the famous power of speed, the urgent sound of the phone interrupted her vision again. Was there really something in the dark that was hindering her? She picked up the phone and found that it was a call from Felicity. She picked up the call lazily, and before she could say anything, she heard sounds like a battle. There were sounds of bowstrings, gunshots, and something that Sia couldn't make out was broken. Realizing that something had happened at Green Arrow, she immediately hung up the phone and teleported to Star City. When they arrived at the Green Arrow Shooting Club, Sia was shocked. Felicity, who was hiding under the table, and Oliver and Tommy, who were jumping up and down to shoot arrows, did not surprise her. What she was surprised about was the opponents they were facing. It was a young woman with black eyes and a head of white hair. Her hands were constantly shooting icicles, ice arrows, and frost rays. Isn't this Caitlin Snow? Or rather, why was the Frost Killer at Green Arrow's place 3 years later? Caitlin did not look like she came from the future. Caitlin's clothes were exactly the same as what Thea saw 3 minutes ago. However, Caitlin's eyes were lifeless, as if she had fallen into an illusion. Her attack was more like a self-defense mechanism. I'll deal with her. Thea stopped Oliver. The frost killer could absorb the surrounding heat, but Oliver liked to exercise shirtless. At this time, he was really cold. He was used to fighting with Hera's magic, so it was like bullying to deal with a mutant. She could use mental shock to deal with the frost killer in its normal state, but at this time, the frost killer had already fainted. No matter how strong the mental shock was, it would be useless. Fire and water magic had no effect on her. In any case, she was a good friend, and Thea could not be too harsh on her. She could only cast 3 hold spells in a row to immobilize her movements, and then knock her out with a karate chop. "This is Caitlin, right? How did she get here?" Thea asked Felicity, who had crawled out from under the table. Frost Killer versus Green Arrow. This was like Central City's elite monster versus Star City's novice village chief. How did the two of them fight? Felicity did not know the truth. She was writing some software when she heard Oliver telling her to run. She ran, but unfortunately, the ground was frozen with a thin layer of ice, and she fell hard. After that, she hid under the table and called for Thea's help. "I think she teleported here. It's a bit like your teleportation gem." Oliver put on a jacket and said as he recalled, "My teleportation gem? How did Caitlin get my gem?" Thea did not remember being so kind as to make one for everyone she knew. "I think I gave her one." Felicity scratched her head and said embarrassedly. Thea closed her eyes and carefully checked the residual energy waves in the air. She came up with a guess. This place was different from the original dimension. Caitlin and Ronnie entered the underground facility at the same time, and they left Psyker to guard outside. Unfortunately, the explosion still happened. At the critical moment of life and death, the young man and woman probably put on a show of life and death together. After that, it should be the end of the tragedy. Ronnie let Caitlin use the teleportation gem and sent her to Star City. Between life and death, the slightly cowardly Caitlin didn't know what to do. Furthermore, due to the explosion of the particle accelerator, the dimensional barrier was broken, various dark matter fused with her cells, and a new personality with powerful superpowers began to awaken. This was the Frost Killer. Originally, she would have slept for a long time, like Barry Allen, who slept for 9 months. The changes on the cellular level would take a long time. However, after the Frost Killer was teleported away, her new personality was very weak and sensitive. She was stimulated by the murderous aura of the various arrows in the Green Arrow and went on a rampage. Thea felt that her guess was not far from the truth. If she gave Caitlin a new treatment now, she would become a completely different Frost Killer in the future. She warned Felicity not to give away the things she gave her before returning to her lab with Caitlin. A large amount of nutrient solution was injected into her body, but there was no good treatment for this new personality. Emotional energy could help the two personalities merge again. Caitlin was not good at other emotions like hope, compassion, and courage. She was good at playing with fear, so there was no need to directly inject a large amount of fear into the new personality. The new personality's strength was relative. This personality's perception of the world was still very blurry. Now, facing the abyss-like fear, it only managed to resist for a short while before collapsing. Helplessly, it woke up the old personality that was hibernating and silently began to merge again. Thea was very satisfied. The two were originally of the same origin, so they could merge and influence each other. Soon, they would merge again. She did not look at Caitlin anymore. Instead, she studied her own condition. Originally, she thought that she would be fine as long as she stayed far away from the scene. She didn't expect that when the particle accelerator exploded, all kinds of substances from different dimensions would appear one after another. During this process, some unknown substances would combine with her gaze, causing some inexplicable strange changes. Chapter 5:02. After some simple tests, she found that the basic functions of both eyes were still present: X-ray vision, telescopic vision, and additional fear emotion. By injecting a large amount of emotional energy in a short period of time, she could also create a heat ray similar to the Kryptonians. She could use it occasionally, but not for a long time. It would consume a lot of emotional energy. Back then, Thea had emitted a yellow light. Now, her eyes were the same color as her eyes. The ray had turned green. Most importantly, the ray was no longer a straight line. Instead, it could turn at will according to Thea's will. Is this going to be an omega ray? Heidi scratched her head. Other than the ability to turn, she couldn't figure out any other function for the time being. After studying for a long time, she still couldn't figure it out. She could only think about it later. Caitlin slept in her high-tech medical cabin for 3 days before she woke up. This was not the kind sold on the market. It was prepared by Thea for her family and friends. As long as they didn't die on the spot, they could be saved. Where am I? Caitlin looked around. She had never been here before. Her mind was in a mess. Thea waved her hand in front of her face. Do you remember me? Caitlin stared at her for a long time before she remembered. Thea, yes, it seems that your memory is recovering. That's good news. I remember I was in a cutting-edge laboratory. Then, Ronnie? Who's Ronnie? Caitlin rubbed her white hair desperately. Her face was full of pain and confusion. Thea roughly explained the situation at that time, leaving out all the guesses. In the end, she said, the two personalities merged. Although this is still you, it's like a new personality accepting the memory of the past. The old Caitlin doesn't exist anymore. Thea had a good impression of the old Caitlin. She was honest, kind, responsible, and full of good points. Her current personality was actually formed based on her old personality. The good parts were basically inherited, but the influence of the Frost Killer was still unavoidable. Her gaze was always cold, and it was a sharp contrast to the Caitlin who used to treat everyone warmly. As for Ronnie, he should be your fiancé. I don't know much about him, Thea said as she showed Caitlin some photos and videos. These were the results of Gideon's searches from various regions. He had ordered them to be made into a short film and replayed Caitlin's life experience in video form. Needless to say, the effect was not bad. Caitlin was already enlightened before it finished playing. Oh, I remember now. Ronnie is my fiancé, and you're my best friend, Caitlin confirmed. Thea felt a little choked. Their relationship could only be said to be ordinary. How could they talk about this? After asking a few questions in a roundabout way, Thea suddenly realized that in order to integrate her personality, she had instilled a little too much fear. In the fused subconscious, Caitlin had some kind of effect similar to Stockholm Syndrome. Coupled with the fact that the two of them were friends under the intense fear, the new personality automatically came up with the illusion that the two of them were best friends. It was a little exaggerated to say that it was an illusion. No matter what the truth was, the two of them were good friends. This was the basis of the integration of the new personality. If this was denied, Caitlin's new personality would not be mentioned. That's right. You're a very good friend of mine. A very good assistant. Thea's tone changed as she spoke. After all, when she first introduced Fiora as her adjutant, Diana had been suspicious for a while. This friend could easily cause a lot of confusion. Her personality was still very young. A lot of memories were instilled in her mind. Caitlin did not care about the difference between the two terms. As long as they were related, she accepted the role of an assistant. Caitlin moved a little on the spot, and the temperature in the room began to drop rapidly. Caitlin seemed to know that she was in trouble and quickly stopped. It was not good to be too strong. She could not control it at all. Thea directly used magic to seal the few channels in her brain that controlled her ability. Afraid that she would be in danger because of the seal in her body and could not use her ability, Thea gave her a replica light ring. This replica light ring had two functions. The first was to hide the existence of the ring. The second was to temporarily open the seal in Caitlin's body. As for her white hair, there was no need to hide it. She had disappeared for 3 days. There had to be an explanation. Yes, Thea planned to let her return to reverse lightning. There were still 9 months until Barry Allen woke up. Although the alias Dr. Wells had a bad reputation, reverse lightning had at least gotten rid of the public's attention. Who knew if he would obediently stay for 9 months? If he did something wrong, Thea would be in a passive position. She told Caitlin that no matter what reverse lightning asked, she did not know. If he mistakenly thought that Caitlin had awakened a teleportation ability, that would be fine. Thea made up more than 10 excuses on the spot and asked Caitlin to memorize them so that she could improvise in the future. She also asked Gideon to simulate reverse lightning's thinking and behavior. After a few tests, Caitlin played the role of a frightened young woman perfectly, whether it was frowning and saying that she did not know, or thinking hard but could not get an answer. Caitlin, who was no longer obedient, played the role very well. Not long after Caitlin returned, she sent back a new message. Reverse lightning only asked a few questions about her whereabouts and gave the whole laboratory a long vacation. They could stay or leave at will. He was also busy playing the role of a middle-aged scientist who had been tortured mentally and had his conscience whipped. Just like in the original timeline, reverse lightning was now in a wheelchair and pretending to be a cripple. Every day, he used his weathered face to face accusations and questions from all sides. One day after Caitlin returned to Central City, Thea and Olivier also came to Central City's cutting-edge technology laboratory. The siblings were here to visit Barry Allen. Barry's adoptive father, Joe West, knew that Thea was one of the rare scientific masters in the medical field. He spent a lot of favors and beat around the bush to get to her door. Olivier happened to know about this as well, so the siblings came to visit Barry. Dr. Quinn, come and take a look. The people in the hospital said that Barry is dead. There is no heartbeat, but the people in the laboratory said that he is still alive. The tall and strong middle-aged black man, Joe West, really treated Barry like his own son. He was afraid that the people in the cutting-edge technology laboratory would do something to him, so he stayed with Barry for 4 days. Please call me Thea. I will take a look at his condition first. Thea nodded to Joe West and Barry's childhood friend, Ayers West. Barry had always liked her, but she did not realize it. This girl was really slow, but their relationship was really good. Chapter 5:03. Ayers' eyes were red from crying, and her voice was hoarse. She nodded and moved aside. It was definitely not appropriate for her to use the magnifying healing spell directly. Even if no one was watching, she could not do anything overboard, not to mention that reverse lightning was watching from somewhere. Fortunately, Dr. Thea was a medical giant, and she was familiar with all the medical equipment. Many of the cutting-edge technology in the laboratory were even developed by the Quinn Group. After a serious and responsible check, Sia began to understand. She couldn't see anything wrong with Barry. Magic could forcefully wake him up, but the consequences would be very, very serious. She didn't want to risk her life with a group of people who were extremely fast at different times. Mr. West, please rest assured. It's not that Barry doesn't have a heartbeat. It's just that his heartbeat is too fast for the machine to detect. His body is undergoing a very strange change. His cells, bones, lymph nodes, muscles, and even his skin are undergoing earth-shattering changes. Thea's words were very certain. As the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine, No one in the world would dare to refute her conclusion without verifying it hundreds of times. Joe West, who had been a police officer for half his life, naturally did not doubt her. However, he still asked with doubts, "Then, when will Barry wake up?" Thea pretended to calculate and came up with the final answer: "In 9 months." After a brief conversation, the siblings bid farewell to the father and daughter, who were slightly relieved. They then went to see the owner of the laboratory, Reverse Lightning, who was disguised as Dr. Wales. In order to compensate the victims, Reverse Lightning sold all the assets of Dr. Wales to pay for the sky-high compensation. Now that he had dismissed everyone, he really treated the laboratory as his home. "Doctor, please restrain your grief. Failure is the mother of success." Thea pretended to be affectionate and comforted him. Seeing that she did not directly pull Barry up, Reverse Lightning was relieved. At this time, his acting skills were on full display. He said with tears in his eyes, 17 people died. Hundreds of people were injured. I am ashamed to face all the people who trusted me. The two of them showed off their acting skills on the spot. Sia combined her image of a capitalist who disregarded human life and a person who explored new heights in medicine. Reverse Lightning, on the other hand, showed pain, guilt, regret, and so on. Both of them immersed themselves in their true feelings and went through the process. After that, they went back to their respective homes. It would take at least 400 years for Reverse Lightning's mother to be born. Thea wouldn't be able to see her for a while, so she went home to look for her biological mother. Moira's mayoral term was less than 2 years away. As for the next step of her plan, whether it was herself or her staff, they all welcomed Moira's preparation to run for the White House. However, the process was extremely complicated. At least in the 4th year, or the year before the election, she would spend a whole year busy with the campaign. Modern candidates generally began preparations a year and a half in advance. This required the support of Moira's family members. In some occasions, family members had to be present to act as mascots. Thea was not worried about Moira. After all, this was her suggestion. Moira was worried about Oliver. Her son's way of thinking was very strange. To be honest, as his mother, she did not know what Oliver was thinking. As she expected, Thea didn't react when she heard that she wanted to go further. She just nodded and continued to eat her dinner. Oliver was a little stunned. His own mother was going to run for President of the United States. Would this affect him? Of course it would. At least the FBI and the CIA were responsible for protecting the president's family. If he was watched by agents every day, it would be inconvenient for him to move freely every night like now. However, Oliver was in no position to stop her. Besides, there were still 2 years left. What if she didn't get elected? Thinking of this, Oliver followed Thea's example and lowered his head to eat. Moira was satisfied. If her children didn't object, it meant that they supported her. After hesitating for a moment, Moira said, "Thea, you and Miss Prince won't make a big deal out of it, right?" Thea thought about it and understood what her mother meant. She was afraid of causing a big scandal. She waved her hand and said, "Don't worry. We have a very long life. For Diana, we are still very young." After getting a satisfactory answer, Moira looked at Oliver and asked, "What about you? You and that Chinese woman?" During dinner, they began to discuss Oliver's marriage. To be honest, Moira was not satisfied with Shadow, but she would not be happy if Oliver chose Laurel. In short, when a mother-in-law looked at her daughter-in-law, she would find something she did not like about her daughter-in-law. After dinner, the family sat in front of the TV and chatted. Thea was especially concerned about who would succeed the mayor of Star City in 2 years after Moira's death. Several mayors in the original space-time died, in office one after another. 2 years later, Oliver changed and became the mayor. Now, it was impossible. Mother and son inheritance? This was too shocking. The basic democratic system still needed to be taught. Sebastian Brad is a very ambitious young man. I have a hunch that he will win in the end. Moira put forward her idea to the future mayor of Star City. Sebastian Bullard? Thea thought for a moment. She had some impression of him. He was a person who was good at putting on a show. In the original timeline, he was the mayor candidate who stood out after Malcolm shook Star City. In fact, he was Death Knell's subordinate. Now, Malcolm and Madame Xanadu were very close. Death Knell was also expanding his territory in outer space. Neither of them had anything to do with Star City. Thea didn't care about it at all. She didn't care about it at all. However, she didn't care about others, but someone was thinking about her. 2 days later, on a sunny afternoon, Thea was interrupted by the low beeping of her mobile phone. "What's the matter, Gideon?" "Someone has triggered the confidential document codenamed M," the artificial intelligence reported emotionlessly. "Show it to me." Thea turned on the desktop monitor. A minute ago, someone tried to retrieve information about Star City Hospital's Dr. Jill and your birth certificate from 22 years ago. Thea rubbed her forehead. "How did you deal with it?" "I intercepted it according to the preset plan, but the other party didn't give up." Inferring from the information in the other party's computer, the other party is digging deeper into this matter. After Gideon finished speaking, he displayed a large photo on the screen. The other party was a Caucasian man in his 30s. He was dressed very plainly and had a long face. He was not good-looking, but his eyes were very spirited. Thea looked at the name displayed at the bottom of the screen. Sebastian Brad. She laughed. Such a rotten fish dared to investigate her background. He really didn't want to live anymore. This was the arrangement of fate. Thea thought for a moment. She took out the light ring and contacted Death Knell, who was far away in outer space. He was the most suitable person to do this. Chapter 504. Death Knell came quickly. He didn't ask why after he got the mission target. He went to catch the person alone. Half an hour later, Thea met the daring mayoral candidate, Mr. Sebastian Bullard, in her laboratory. She could tell that Death Knell's sudden attack had scared the man out of his wits. Although he tried to stand up, his legs were shaking like a sieve. He tried a few times, but failed. "Mr. Sebastian, do you recognize me?" Thea was wearing a sleeveless black sundress. She sat on the chair with her hands crossed on her legs and asked curiously. Sebastian looked at Death Knell, who was as strong as a bear, with 2 swords on his back, and had a lot of blood on his body. He wanted to say that he didn't know her, but thanks to Thea's popularity and his previous investigation, as well as what he was doing half an hour ago, he didn't deserve to have a brain if he couldn't connect the dots. He smiled bitterly and tried to please her. "I know Dr. Thea Quinn. I've seen your photo. You're prettier than the photo." Thea smiled back elegantly, but her words were as cold as ice. "You're investigating me? You're trying to find a way to attack my mother through me, aren't you? Is this your plan to smear your ex's reputation?" Sebastian weighed the pros and cons in his heart and finally nodded slightly. "Maybe in your heart, I'm just a small figure, a symbol, a weapon you use to attack your political opponents. Am I right?" This time, Sebastian didn't dare to nod because he saw Death Knell draw his swords. The law couldn't save him, and neither could the voters. He could only save himself. "I was just curious. I didn't mean to belittle you." Sebastian waved his hands in an attempt to make his words more convincing. Unfortunately, Thea ignored his little gestures. "You're trying to destroy my family. What mayor? What president? Ask my men. They'll tell you if I care about those things." Death Knell didn't have time to answer the prisoner's question. He was looking around. With Thea's anger, the ground of the lab shook slightly. There was something like static electricity in the air. The static electricity hit the paper and made a crackling sound. You're just a dirty politician. Calling you a politician is already a compliment to you. Even the FBI doesn't dare to investigate, but you actually have the guts to investigate. Looking at your computer records, you even contacted a few media outlets. Ha ha, Sia chuckled as she spoke. Who would have thought that such an arrogant person who had nothing to do with her life would almost do something that would have a profound impact on the world? With a flick of his finger, before Sebastian could understand what was going on, he found himself pressed to the ground by an invisible force. In his sight, he could only see Sia's high heels and chair. The mysterious and strange method made his heart beat violently. Today, he seemed to have found something amazing, but he didn't know if the other party would spare his life. Sia seemed to be talking to him, but also seemed to be talking to herself. If you reveal my identity to the public, my mother and brother will be questioned by countless people, and my family will be destroyed because of it. You must have thought about this, right? But you don't know what I'll do if I don't have a family to hold me back. It's something you can't even imagine in your dreams. Democracy? Dream of your democracy. The temperature in the room dropped visibly. Sebastian felt that the air he exhaled began to turn into mist. He wanted to shrink his body, but an invisible force stretched him, and he could only lie on the ground motionlessly. Do you know the God on earth of the unrighteous alliance? Thea laughed self-deprecatingly. You don't know. If I want to, I can paralyze the global military network. Nuclear bombing is not a plot in a novel. Superheroes have their own weaknesses. They can't stop me. Mankind will be on the fast track to destruction before it reaches glory, and it's all because of you, Mr. Sebastian Brad. Do you know that a nameless nobody like you actually had the opportunity to decide the fate of all of humanity at that moment? Thea looked at his confused eyes. You don't know anything. Without the permission of the higher-ups, without secret support, you're just an infuriating wretch. Your existence is meaningless. You can disappear now. He thought that Thea was going to kill him. Although he didn't understand what she said before, he still understood that she was going to kill him. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he struggled, it was useless. Just when he was in despair, he suddenly found himself floating. Then he met Thea's green eyes. The other party's eyes flashed with colorful light, as if some great power had hit him. Something invisible was cutting the void. Sebastian didn't know how long it had been, but it felt like a year or a moment. He felt that he had regained his ability to move. The scary woman was rubbing her forehead, and the bear-like, brawny man looked at him in confusion. Sebastian didn't think too much and ran away, returning to the crowded street. He had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Why did she let him go? Was she going to play some cat and mouse game? He didn't know. He only knew that he had to run. After taking the taxi, he realized that he didn't have a single cent on him. His mobile phone, credit cards, and other things were all gone. He used his glib tongue to persuade the driver to take him to Star City, and he would pay the driver double the fare. However, when he arrived at Star City, Sebastian was dumbfounded. His campaign office had turned into a private house. He called his assistant, but the assistant said that he didn't know him. After noticing the strangeness of the situation, he went to the base of his dark forces. He was not a pure person. He had once gathered a few people from the underworld to form a small gang. Usually, they would do things that were inconvenient for him to show his face. The situation in the base was exactly the same as in the campaign office. The environment was still the same, but the people were no longer the same. Using the familiar terrain nearby, Sebastian got rid of the taxi driver and fled all the way back to his residence. Jumping in through the window, he found that this was no longer his home. The layout was different. The furnishings were different, and there were strangers hanging on the wall. Sebastian felt that he was going crazy. At first, he thought that Thea was very powerful and had a lot of people. She wanted to cut off all his escape routes and make him beg for death. But a series of failures gave him a horrible idea. Everything he had done before seemed to be illusory. The other parties seemed to have erased the traces of his existence. Chapter 5:05. In order to verify his conjecture, he deliberately created a small conflict on the street. Sebastian was arrested and sent to the police station, but the police were surprised, and he was terrified. There was no record of him in the police station. He provided some information and asked the police to help search for his parents. The result was the same. His parents were both there, but there was no record of him. At least, there was no record of him in the police station. It was rare to find an unrecorded person in modern society. Many police officers came to watch, but Sebastian found that many of the police officers he knew did not know him. He became more and more sad. He pretended to be crazy and was detained in the police station for 2 days, leaving behind a legend that he might be a time traveler. Finally, he was taken away by the Star City Mental Hospital. Such a small matter was treated as a topic of conversation in the Star City police station. It did not take long for Thea to hear about it. She just laughed it off. Who would have thought that this guy was going to run for mayor? No one remembered him. Sebastian did not exist in anyone's memory. Except for himself and Thea, no one knew about this person's past. All traces of his existence had been erased from the source by the power of rules. The price was that Sia had a headache and a week of dizziness. Just an ordinary person was enough to make her feel terrible. She couldn't use this move, which she named Eye of Obliteration, easily anymore, at least not at this stage. Star City regained its tranquility, and no one remembered Sebastian. Several outstanding people who were expected to succeed as the mayor of Star City had already begun to secretly exchange various interests. Star City's economy was prosperous, and public security was stable. They didn't need to do anything to get a good political achievement. No one could refuse this temptation. The prosperity and stability of Star City naturally bred crime. After the Brick Wall Gang was defeated, another criminal with the code name Count of Vertigo rose in Star City. He produced a large amount of hallucinogens and put them on the market. The crime rate in the city increased by several percent in just a week. Felicity, who asked Thea out for coffee, just said a few words and stopped talking about Count of Vertigo. Now that the Green Arrow team was strong and powerful, a little Count of Vertigo was not worth mentioning. How is Sarah now? You seem to be a lot more capable than I thought, Thea couldn't help but exclaim. That day, when she went to find Green Arrow, she was shocked. The shooting club had 2 more female members. Laurel's sister, Sarah Lance, had finally returned to Star City. Together with her was the Ninja Master's daughter, Nissa El Ghul. Talia's ruthless rule forced Nisha and Sarah to hide outside for 2 years. That's right, these 2 ladies had that kind of intimate relationship. Sarah, who missed her sister and her father, had nowhere to go. In the end, she brought Nisha back to Star City. Because of the participation of Thea and the future Sarah back then, Sarah did not meet Oliver on Purgatory Island in this time and space. The 2 of them met and fought for a long time before they realized that they were running friends. In a trance, the 2 of them seemed to have rekindled their old relationship. This angered the Ninja Master's youngest daughter. Nissa, don't you dare steal Sarah from me. How could the word messy be enough to describe the entanglement of their feelings? Compared to the tangled relationship between them, the Count of Vertigo was just a small problem. As an outsider, Thea felt that it was messy. As an insider, Oliver was even more messy. The siblings would occasionally chat a little. Everything had to be solved by themselves. That day, when the giant creature was purified, the magic content in the air increased. Coupled with the explosion of the particle accelerator in Midtown, the unknown substance in the air was increasing rapidly. Some abnormalities could be found all over the world. Thea could feel that the surface of the calm water was unusually restless. Something bad could happen at any time. In a peaceful afternoon, when Thea was preparing to go home after a busy day of work, a series of urgent phone calls interrupted her journey. "Come to Gotham quickly. Superman has gone crazy." The person who called her was Barbara Gordon. On the other side of the phone, it sounded like a demolition site. The rumbling sound was incessant. Thea did not have time to think. She put on the god's armor and rushed straight to Gotham, without caring about shocking the world. As she flew at full speed, Gotham came into view in the blink of an eye. Half of the street had been destroyed. Ordinary citizens were running for their lives. The gangs on the street had started a frenzy of looting. In the air, there were also police and television planes. The former was maintaining order, while the latter was reporting the news without fear of death. However, the most eye-catching one was Superman, who flew in the air from time to time. He was wearing a blue tight suit and a red cape. His eyes were scarlet red. On the ground, fighting with him was Batman, who was wearing a set of heavy robot-like armor. The thick armor provided him with a strong defense. Various black technology equipment also provided the armor with decent attack power. However, the battle was rushed, and he was not prepared at all. Even though Batman was wearing the armor that he named Anti-Superman, he was still beaten to a pulp. What was going on? A few days ago, she was worried that something would happen to Louise. Superman could not have turned evil so quickly, right? Seeing that Batman was about to fall, Thea did not have time to ask. She flew down and received Superman's fatal punch. The force sent her flying more than 10 meters. At the same time, Superman was also pushed back 2 meters. In terms of pure strength, there was still a gap between the two of them, but the gap was not big. What's going on? Can someone explain it to me? Thea took out her holy sword and faced Superman with a bright light. There's something controlling him in his chest. Batman's armor was severely damaged. The voice that came out was a little distorted. Thea then looked at Superman's chest. Because Clark's pectoral muscles had always been well developed, even many women could not compare, so she had not noticed it. At this time, with Batman's reminder, she saw a dark purple plant under Superman's clothes. For tentacle-like things were constantly absorbing his vitality. The main body of the plant was also emitting a kind of sound wave that was like a psychic shock. It affected Superman's brain through some kind of extremely strange resonance. Black Mercy? Thea had an impression of this thing, whether it was in the plot of the Supergirl TV series or in reality, helping Poison Ivy collect strange plants. Thea had seen this thing before. Although she had seen it before, it was not easy to deal with it. This thing had no combat power at all, but in its long evolution, it had a very damn symbiotic defense system. If it was forcibly pulled by an external force, Superman's chances of survival were less than 1 in 10,000. How did the original Supergirl deal with it? Thea thought about it while dealing with Superman's attack. It was very difficult for this broken plant to perfectly control the Kryptonians. Their level of life was different. Just like ants could not control humans, it could not control Superman. At least not completely. This made Thea breathe a sigh of relief. This kind of purely external corruption was much easier to deal with than Superman's subjective corruption. If the normal and rational Superman's combat power was 1, then the Superman who had completely abandoned his moral standards was 5. The guy in front of her, who was controlling Superman like a puppet, could not even exert half of his combat power. The only pity was that this plant controlled Superman and was immune to many of the psychic control spells. Thea could only fight with the big sword. The situation was a bit of a stalemate for a while.